The gun wasn't loaded, but Evelyn Carter didn't know that when the cowboy made his impossible offer. She'd traveled 1,500 miles from Philadelphia's polished parlors to Arizona's dusty heartland, fleeing a scandal that swallowed her family whole. Now she stood before a stranger who looked at her not with pity, but with calculation. "Only if you'll marry me by sundown," Cole Tanner said, his weathered hand extended like a lifeline wrapped in thorns. 6 hours until sunset. 6 hours to decide if desperation was stronger than sense. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The Arizona Territory had a way of stripping a person down to their bones. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but it was honest in a way that cities never were. Out here, the sun didn't care about your pedigree or your pretty manners. It just burned relentless and pure until you either found shade or learned to carry your own. Evelyn Carter had run out of shade 3 states ago. She stood at the edge of the Iron Willow Ranch on a Tuesday morning in late September 1883, her traveling dress caked with dust the color of dried blood. The leather bag at her feet contained everything she owned in the world. 2 spare dresses, her mother's silver hairbrush, a Bible she hadn't opened since the funeral, and 47 cents in coins that clinked with a hollowness that made her stomach ache. The ranch gate hung crooked on its hinges, a detail that felt significant, though she couldn't say why. Beyond it, a long drive cut through scrubland toward a cluster of buildings that shimmered in the heat. Like a mirage she was terrified would disappear if she blinked. The main house was modest 2 stories of weathered wood that had surrendered its original color to the elements. A barn stood to the east, larger and better maintained, its shadow stretching long across a corral where horses shifted and stamped. Smaller outbuildings dotted the property, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, structures whose purposes she could only guess. She'd walked 4 miles from town. Her boots, once fine leather suitable for Philadelphia's cobblestones, had begun to separate at the seams. Each step sang a little song of pain. "You looking for something or just admiring the view?" The voice came from her left, startling her so badly she nearly dropped her bag. A woman emerged from behind a cottonwood tree carrying a wicker basket filled with laundry. She was perhaps 50, with silver threading through dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her dress was simple calico faded from countless washings, and her hands showed the calluses of hard work, but her eyes were sharp and not unkind. Evelyn's throat was so dry the words stuck. She swallowed hard. "I'm looking for work. I heard in town that this ranch might need help." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. She set down her basket and crossed her arms, studying Evelyn with the same assessing look a horse trader might give questionable merchandise. "Heard wrong, most likely," the woman said, but her tone was matter-of-fact rather than dismissive. "We're not a big operation. Mr. Tanner, he runs things pretty lean. Got a cook that's me and 6 hands. Don't usually need more." The words hit like stones. Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest, the last fragile shell of hope. She'd been so sure walking those 4 miles that she could make this work, that she could convince someone, anyone, to give her a chance. "Please." The word came out smaller than she intended. "I can do anything. Cooking, cleaning, mending, accounts. My father taught me bookkeeping. I'm strong. I learned quickly." The woman's expression softened, but only slightly. "Where you from, girl?" "Philadelphia." "That's a long way to come for ranch work." "Yes, ma'am." "Got family out here?" "No, ma'am." A pause waited with unasked questions. The woman didn't ask them which Evelyn was grateful for. She didn't think she could explain about the trial, about her father swinging from a rope in the courtyard of the Eastern State Penitentiary, about the creditors who'd seized their home before his body was cold. About the society ladies who'd turned their faces away, about her fiancé, who'd returned her ring with a note that said simply, "I'm sorry, but you understand." She understood perfectly. She was poisoned now, the daughter of a thief and a fraud. "Wait here," the woman finally said. "I'll see if Mr. Tanner will speak with you." She disappeared toward the main house, leaving Evelyn alone with the cottonwood's rustling leaves and the distant sound of men's voices from the barn. Evelyn pressed her palm against the rough bark of the tree, trying to steady herself. The morning sun was already fierce, and she could feel sweat gathering beneath her collar, trickling down her spine. She'd thought she understood hardship when her mother died of scarlet fever. She'd been 12 and the grief had seemed enormous, world-ending. But she'd still had her father their house on Rittenhouse Square, her future as the wife of James Whitmore, attorney at law. That girl seemed like a stranger now, someone naive and soft, someone who'd never known that everything could disappear in the space between one breath and the next. The door to the main house opened. The woman reappeared, and behind her came a man. Evelyn's first thought was that he moved like he was made of the same material as the land itself. Solid, unhurried, permanent. He was tall, probably 6 feet or more, with shoulders broadened by years of physical labor. His shirt was dark blue sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms tanned nearly brown by the sun. Dark hair touched the collar of his shirt, and a few days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her gray blue like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. He stopped a few paces away, those eyes moving over her with the same assessing quality the other woman had shown, but sharper somehow. More thorough. Evelyn felt exposed under that gaze, as if he could see through the dust and desperation to the truth of what she was. "Martha says you're looking for work." His voice was low, roughened by wind and use. "Yes, sir. I can cook clean, keep accounts mend." He held up a hand, cutting her off. "You ever work on a ranch before?" "No, sir." "Ever work at all?" The question stung, but it was fair. "Not for wages. But I managed my father's household for 5 years after my mother died. I supervised staff, maintained the books, planned meals, organized staff." The word held a note of something not quite mockery, but close. "How many took? 6. A cook, 2 maids, a housekeeper, a groundskeeper, and a driver." "So you gave orders, didn't take them?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "I worked alongside them. I didn't just sit idle." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those storm cloud eyes. He glanced at Martha, who shrugged slightly. "She walked from town," Martha offered. 4 miles in this heat in those boots." The man, Mr. Tanner, looked down at Evelyn's feet. She resisted the urge to hide them behind her skirts like a child caught in mischief. "Why Arizona?" he asked suddenly. "Why not stay in Philadelphia? Find a position there." "Because everyone knows. Because the newspapers ran my father's face on the front page. Because I can't walk down Chestnut Street without whispers following me like ghosts." "I needed a fresh start," she said instead. "Somewhere no one knew me." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he was reading all the things she hadn't said. Finally he spoke. "I don't need help. Ranch is running fine as it is." The words were a door closing. Evelyn felt her knees go weak. She'd been so focused on convincing someone to hire her that she hadn't planned for what came after rejection. Where would she go? She'd spent the last of her money on the train ticket west. The landlady in town had made it clear that 47 cents wouldn't even buy a night's lodging. "However," Tanner continued, and Evelyn's head snapped up, "I do have a problem you might solve." Hope, painful and bright, flared in her chest. "Anything. I'll do anything." "Careful making promises like that out here." His tone was dry. "People hold you to them." "I meant it." He glanced at Martha again. The older woman's face was unreadable, but she gave a small nod as if granting permission for something. "Walk with me," Tanner said. He set off toward the house without waiting to see if she'd follow. Evelyn grabbed her bag and hurried after him, her protesting boots and screaming feet forgotten in the sudden urgency of the moment. Martha fell into step beside her, silent but present. They circled around the main house to where a smaller structure stood about 50 yards distant. It was half-built walls framed, but not yet sided, the roof only partially shingled. Lumber lay stacked nearby, and Evelyn could smell the sharp sweetness of fresh-cut wood. "Homestead claim," Tanner said, stopping before the skeletal building. "Government says if I can prove I'm improving the land building a permanent residence, I can file for an additional 160 acres adjacent to my current property. Would double the size of this ranch." "That's wonderful," Evelyn said cautiously, not understanding what this had to do with her. "It would be. Except the law also says the claimant has to be married. Has to prove he's building a home for a family, not just expanding a business." Understanding crashed over her like cold water. She stared at him, then at the half-built house, then back at him. "You want me to..." I need a wife, Tanner said bluntly. On paper anyway. The claim inspector comes next month. If I'm married living in that house showing clear intent to establish a family homestead, the land is mine. If not, a man named Harlan Price will file a counterclaim, and his pockets are deep enough to tie this up in court until I'm bankrupt. Evelyn's mind spun. But I don't even know you. Marriage is a legal contract, he interrupted, which is all I'm proposing. You need work and a place to stay. I need a wife to satisfy the government's requirements. It's a practical arrangement. Marriage is more than practical, she heard herself say, and immediately felt foolish. What did she know about marriage? Her engagement to James had been arranged by their fathers over brandy and cigars. She'd thought she loved him, but when tested, that love had dissolved like morning fog. Can be, Tanner agreed, but it doesn't have to be. Plenty of marriages out here are partnerships first. Affection, if it comes later, or not at all. Martha cleared her throat. Cole, you can't just spring this on the girl. I'm not springing anything, he said, his tone even. I'm making an offer. She's free to refuse. He looked at Evelyn directly, and she saw something in his face she hadn't expected, a bone-deep weariness that matched her own. This wasn't a man toying with her or taking advantage. This was someone as desperate as she was, just better at hiding it. I can't pay much in wages, he continued, but as my wife, you'd have room and board safety and a share in what this ranch becomes. You'd help Martha with the cooking and the house. Learn the account books, I'm terrible at them. Represent the ranch at social functions in town when needed. And in a year, maybe two, when the claim is secure and the land is legally mine, we dissolve the marriage if you want. I'll give you enough money to start over somewhere else with references. And if I don't want to dissolve it? The question escaped before she could stop it. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe. Then we'd figure that out when we got there. Evelyn's hands were shaking. She gripped her bag tighter to hide it. This was insane. You didn't marry strangers. You didn't bind your life to someone you'd known for all of 10 minutes. But what were her alternatives? She could go back to town, spend her last coins on a single meal, and then what? Sleep in the street. Try to find work in a place where single women without connections were assumed to be prostitutes, or worse. She had no family, no friends, no prospects. Philadelphia was closed to her forever. Why me? She asked quietly. You could place an advertisement. Find someone willing to come west specifically for this purpose. No time. Inspector's letter came last week. I need to be married and established before he arrives, or Price wins by default. He paused. And you're already here. Already desperate enough to say yes. The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, it felt almost respectful. He wasn't lying or manipulating. He was laying the truth bare and letting her choose. I need to think, she said. Fair enough, but I need an answer by sundown. Sundown, that's... She glanced at the sun, calculating. 6 hours. About that. The judge in town closes his office at 6. If we're doing this, it has to be today. Cole, Martha said, her voice carrying a warning. She deserves to know the terms, he replied. Then to Evelyn. Think on it. Martha can show you around, get you some water and a meal. When the sun touches the top of those mountains, he pointed west where the peaks rose like broken teeth against the sky. I'll need your answer, yes or no. He walked away before she could respond, his stride long and purposeful, heading toward the barn, where the sound of hammer on metal rang like a bell. Evelyn stood frozen, her mind a chaos of thoughts that wouldn't settle into order. Come on, Martha said gently, touching her elbow. Let's get you out of this sun. Well, the kitchen was mercifully cool, or maybe Evelyn had just been so hot that anything felt like relief. Martha sat her at a rough-hewn table and brought water in a tin cup. Evelyn drank it too fast and choked water spilling down her chin. Martha said nothing, just refilled the cup and set out bread, butter, and cold chicken left from the previous night's supper. Evelyn ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. Her mind kept circling back to Tanner's offer. Only if you'll marry me by sundown. How long have you worked here? She asked finally. Martha settled into a chair across from her with a cup of coffee. 12 years, give or take. Came out here with my husband after the war. He got work as a ranch hand and I cooked. When he passed 5 years back, heart gave out. Cole let me stay on. A lot of men wouldn't have. What's he like? The question felt childish, but Evelyn needed to know. Mr. Tanner. Fair, quiet. Works harder than any two men I've known. Martha paused, choosing her words. He's had a hard road, lost his family young, built this place from nothing, and now someone's trying to take it away. This Harlan Price, Martha's mouth tightened. Price owns half the territory, or acts like he does. Big ranch south of here bought up smaller spreads when folks couldn't make it. He wanted Cole's land years ago, made an offer. Cole refused. Price don't take refusal well. Can't Mr. Tanner just, I don't know, buy the land outright? Doesn't work that way with homestead claims. Government gives it free if you can prove you're improving it according to their rules. Cole's been working that claim for 3 years, should be his by rights. But the new regulations say married claimants get priority, and Price knows it. He'll have his lawyers arguing Cole don't qualify, and without a wife, they'd be right. Evelyn absorbed this. So I'd be helping him keep what's already his. That's the truth of it. And what does he get out of the marriage besides the land claim? Martha smiled faintly. You're sharp. I like that. She sipped her coffee. Cole's alone, has been since his family died when he was barely more than a boy. He's good at the work, good with horses and cattle and all the practical things. But running a ranch proper, like dealing with the social side of things, keeping books, managing a household, those aren't his strengths. He needs a partner, someone who can handle the parts he can't. He could hire someone for that. Could. But folks out here respect family. A married rancher with a wife who knows her way around society, even if it's Philadelphia society that carries weight, opens doors. Martha leaned forward slightly. I'll tell you plain, Cole's offer is strange, but it ain't dishonest. He'll keep his word if you keep yours. And girl, I don't know what you're running from, but you look like someone who's run just about out of road. Evelyn's throat tightened. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been there? Martha's voice was kind. I won't pry. Your past is your business. But I will say this, you could do worse than Cole Tanner. He's a good man trying to hold on to something that matters. And if you say yes, you'll have a roof, regular meals, and work that means something. That's more than most folks get. But marriage is what you make it. Some marriages are love matches that turn sour. Some are arrangements that grow into something fine. You won't know which this is until you're in it. Evelyn looked down at her hands, at the dirt under her nails, and the calluses forming on her palms from carrying her bag. She thought about her father's last letter smuggled out of prison before the execution. Be brave, my darling girl. Be braver than I was. Can I see the rest of the ranch? She asked. Martha nodded. Of course. They walked the property in the late morning heat. Martha pointed out the bunkhouse where the 6 ranch hands slept, the smokehouse, fragrant with curing meat. The spring house built over a cold stream. The barn was impressive, well organized and clean, the horses in the stalls looking healthy and well tended. One of the hands, a young man with sunburned cheeks and an easy smile, tipped his hat as they passed. Morning, Miss Martha, ma'am. This is Sam, Martha said. He's the youngest of the crew, been with us 2 years. Pleased to meet you, Evelyn managed. Sam's curiosity was obvious, but he didn't pry, just nodded and returned to mucking stalls. As they walked away, Martha said quietly, the men are good sorts. They'll respect you if Cole says you're to be respected. He's fair, but he don't tolerate disrespect or laziness. They ended up at the half-built homestead claim house. Up close, Evelyn could see the quality of the workmanship. The joints were tight, the framing solid. Someone had measured twice and cut once, had taken pride in the work. Cole's been building it himself, Martha said, reading her thoughts. Nights and Sundays, the hands help when they can spare time, but mostly it's him. Took him 2 years to get this far. It's well made. He don't do things by halves. Evelyn stepped inside the skeletal structure, walking across boards that would someday be a floor. There were 2 rooms downstairs, and the ladder led to a loft space that would likely be divided into more rooms. She could see how it would be finished, a modest but comfortable home built for durability rather than show. If I said yes, Evelyn said slowly, would I live here? Eventually. Right now it ain't weatherproof. You'd stay in the main house until it's finished. Where would I sleep? There's a spare room upstairs, small but private. Cole would stay in his room. He ain't. Martha hesitated. He wouldn't expect. This would be on paper only. You'd have your space. Evelyn's cheeks heated. She hadn't wanted to ask, but the answer mattered. And the men wouldn't, they'd understand it's not. They'd understand you're the boss's wife, and to be treated accordingly, Martha said firmly. Anyone who didn't understand that would be looking for work elsewhere real quick. They stood in silence for a moment, looking out through the empty frame where a window would be. The view stretched toward the mountains, vast and empty and beautiful in a harsh way that Philadelphia had never been. What happened to his family? Evelyn asked. Martha's face closed slightly. That's his story to tell if he chooses. I'll say only that he's got reasons for wanting to make this place work. Reasons that go deeper than just the land. Fair enough. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had sorrows they carried close to the heart. How much time do I have? Martha glanced at the sun. Maybe 4 hours now. 3 to be safe if you're going to make it to town and back. 4 hours to decide the rest of her life. Evelyn spent the next 2 hours in the spare room Martha had shown her. It was small as promised, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for storage. A single window looked out over the ranch yard. She could see men working horses, moving the ordinary life of a place that functioned with purpose. She'd washed her face and hands, changed into her least dusty dress, and tried to think clearly. The choice was impossible because both options were impossible. Say yes and she'd be married to a stranger. Bound by law to a man she didn't love, didn't know, didn't understand. She'd be living a lie pretending to be a wife when she was really an employee with unusual terms of service. Say no, and she'd be back to having nothing. Worse than nothing, she'd be homeless in a territory that ate the weak. She thought about her father. Before the trial, before everything went wrong, he'd been a good man. Flawed, yes. He'd gambled on risky investments and lost everything, then tried to hide it by falsifying accounts. But he'd loved her. In his last letter, he'd written, "Don't let my mistakes define you. You're strong, Evelyn, stronger than you know. Trust that strength." Was this strength agreeing to a marriage of convenience, or was it just another form of surrender? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Martha entered carrying a dress over her arm. "Thought you might want something clean if you're going to town. This was mine when I was younger. Might fit." The dress was simple calico blue with tiny white flowers, worn but clean and carefully mended. It was the dress of a working woman, not a society lady, and something about that felt right. "Thank you," Evelyn said softly. Martha laid it on the bed. "You don't have to do this, you know. If you want to say no, I'll make sure you get back to town safe. Maybe we can find you something else." "Would you?" Evelyn asked. "Would you say yes if you were me?" Martha was quiet for a long moment. "I said yes to something similar once. Came west with a man I barely knew because staying east meant starving. He turned out to be good. We had 15 years together before he died, and I don't regret a single one of them." She paused. "But I ain't you. Can't tell you what's right for your life." After Martha left, Evelyn changed into the borrowed dress. It fit reasonably well, just a bit loose in the waist. She braided her hair, pinned it up, and studied herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked different, simpler, like someone who might actually belong in this harsh, honest place. The sun was moving toward the mountains. She found Cole Tanner in the barn working on a saddle that had seen better days. He looked up when she entered, his hand stilling on the leather. "Made a decision?" he asked. "I have questions first." He nodded, set down his tools, and gave her his full attention. "If I say yes," Evelyn began, "and we marry today, what exactly would you expect from me? Help Martha run the house, keep the books, learn the ranch so you can speak intelligently about it if needed, attend church and social events in town so folks see we're established, act the part of a rancher's wife in public. And in private, you'd have your own space, your own life. I wouldn't—" He stopped, seeming to search for words. "I wouldn't make demands. This is business, not the other thing. What if I wanted it to be more—" The question shocked her even as she said it, but it was honest. "Eventually, I mean. What if this arrangement became real?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, wariness, maybe hope. "Then we'd talk about it when we got there. But I wouldn't expect it or demand it. What if I hated it here? Hated the work, the isolation, the heat. Then at the end of the year, when the claim's secure, I'd honor my promise. I'd give you enough money to start over somewhere else. How much? $200, maybe more if we have a good year. It was generous, more than generous. What if you hated me? She asked quietly. He smiled slightly the first time she'd seen anything close to warmth on his face. I don't hate easy, and you seem like someone who works hard and keeps her word. That's all I need. Evelyn took a breath. I need honesty, complete honesty. Why me? There must be women in town who'd marry you properly, who'd want this life. He was quiet for a moment, and she thought he might refuse to answer. Then he said, because you're desperate enough to say yes, but smart enough to understand the terms. Because you're running from something same as me, and that means we're even. And because, he stopped, because you asked for work before you knew what I'd offer. You were willing to take anything. That tells me you've got grit. It was honest, maybe too honest, but she appreciated it. All right, she said, I'll marry you. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed slightly. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He almost smiled again. Fair enough. We should leave now if we're going to make it to town before the judge closes. Now? Unless you want to walk another 4 miles tomorrow. He was right, of course, but the reality of it hit her suddenly. She was about to marry this stranger, this quiet, weathered man who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved rather than a woman to be cherished. Be brave. All right, she said again. Let's go. They rode to town in a wagon, Cole handling the reins with easy competence, while Evelyn sat beside him in Martha's borrowed dress. Martha had insisted on coming too for propriety, though Evelyn suspected it was more for moral support. The ride took an hour. The sun was well past its peak, now sliding toward those distant mountains. Evelyn watched it marking the time, feeling each minute like a weight settling on her shoulders. Cole didn't talk much, which she was grateful for. She didn't think she could manage conversation. Martha filled the silence with gentle commentary about the landscape, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the early days of settlement. The town Silver Creek was small, maybe 24 buildings clustered around a main street. A general store, a saloon, a church, a hotel, and the judge's office. People moved on the wooden sidewalks going about their business. A few looked up as the wagon passed, curiosity clear on their faces. They'll talk, Martha said quietly, just so you're prepared. Let them, Cole replied. His voice was flat, unconcerned. The judge's office was a small building next to the church. Cole helped Evelyn down from the wagon with a hand that was calloused but gentle. She stood for a moment looking at the door, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down. Last chance to back out, Cole said. She looked at him, really looked. His face was weathered and hard, but not cruel. His eyes were tired, but not unkind. He was offering her a choice even now, even when it would cost him everything. No, she said, I'm doing this. He nodded once, then opened the door. Judge Morrison was a heavy-set man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. He looked up from his desk as they entered, surprise crossing his face. Cole Tanner, wasn't expecting you today. Got a matter needs handling, Cole said. This is Evelyn Carter. We're here to be married. The judge's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. Married since when? Since today. Can you do it or not? Well, Yes, I can. But Cole, are you sure this seems... We're sure. Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. We'd like to do this today if possible. The judge looked between them, clearly skeptical, but too polite to say so. You'll need a witness. 2, actually. Martha's outside, Cole said. And you could fetch the pastor from next door if we need another. Right. Well then. The judge pulled out a form, dipped his pen in ink. I'll need some information from you both. They answered his questions, names, ages, places of birth. Evelyn was 23, Cole was 31. Neither had been married before. No blood relation existed between them. The pastor arrived, slightly breathless, Martha behind him. If he was surprised by the hasty marriage, he hid it well. Shall we begin? Judge Morrison asked. They stood before his desk, Cole's hand found hers, his grip firm and warm. The judge read from a small book, the words washing over Evelyn in a blur. She heard her own voice saying, "I do," heard Cole's deep rumble echoing the same words. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife." That was it. No kiss, no celebration, just ink drying on paper and the setting sun visible through the window. Cole signed the certificate first, his handwriting surprisingly neat. Then Evelyn took the pen, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name. Evelyn Carter Tanner, Mrs. Cole Tanner. It didn't feel real. They rode back to the ranch in twilight, the sky bleeding purple and gold. Evelyn sat beside her husband, and felt numb. "You all right?" Martha asked quietly. "I think so." When they reached the ranch, Cole helped her down from the wagon again. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment, and she saw something in his face that might have been gratitude or regret or both. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I know this isn't what you wanted." "It's what I chose," she replied. He nodded, then stepped back. "Martha will show you to your room, if you need anything." "I'll manage." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. Instead, he headed toward the barn, leaving her alone in the gathering dark. Martha touched her arm. "Come on, let's get you settled." In the small room that was now hers, Evelyn sank onto the bed and finally let herself feel the enormity of what she'd done. She'd married a stranger, bound her life to his on nothing but faith and desperation. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the ranch, settling for nightmen's voices, horses nickering the distant call of a coyote. The sun had touched the mountains, then slipped behind them, taking the day with it. By sundown, she'd said yes. Now she had to figure out what came next. Evelyn woke to the smell of coffee and the low murmur of men's voices drifting through the floorboards. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her was rough wood instead of painted plaster, and the mattress beneath her was harder than anything she'd slept on in Philadelphia. Then memory crashed back the wedding, the certificate, Cole Tanner's calloused hand in hers, as they spoke vows that meant everything and nothing at once. She was married. The window showed early dawn, the sky that particular shade of gray-blue that came just before sunrise. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through the events of the previous day, and when she finally did drift off, her dreams had been strange and anxious. Now her body ached with exhaustion, but lying in bed felt cowardly somehow. If this was to be her life, she needed to start living it. She dressed quickly in Martha's borrowed calico, braided her hair with fingers that felt clumsy with nervousness, and made her way downstairs. The stairs creaked under her feet, announcing her approach. By the time she reached the kitchen, the conversation had stopped and 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Martha stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. Cole sat at the table with a cup of coffee, his hair damp as if he'd already washed at the pump. And beside him sat an older man she hadn't met yesterday, weathered as saddle leather with a gray beard and eyes that assessed her with frank curiosity. "Morning," Martha said warmly. "Coffee." "Please." Evelyn's voice came out rougher than she intended. Cole stood the movement automatic and pulled out a chair. "This is Frank Dalton. He's my foreman. Been with the ranch since the beginning. Frank, this is my wife, Evelyn." "My wife." The words hung in the air, strange and formal. Frank stood as well, nodded politely. "Ma'am, congratulations on the marriage." "Thank you." She sat, accepted the coffee Martha pressed into her hands, and tried to appear more composed than she felt. "Frank came early to discuss the herd rotation," Cole said, and Evelyn understood this was an explanation for why there was company at such an hour. "We're moving cattle to the north pasture today. Takes most of the men," Frank added. "Be gone until near dark, most likely." Cole's eyes met Evelyn's across the table. "You'll be all right here. Martha will show you around properly, get you settled." It wasn't really a question, but she nodded anyway. "I'll be fine." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but Frank cleared his throat and stood. "We should head out. Sun's coming up." Cole drained his coffee, set the cup down with care. As he passed Evelyn's chair, he paused. "If you need anything, I know. Ask Martha." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. Then he was gone. Frank following, and Evelyn was left alone with Martha and the morning light creeping through the windows. Martha set a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of her. "Eat. You look half-starved." Evelyn realized she was famished. She'd barely touched food the day before her stomach too knotted with anxiety. Now she ate with an efficiency that would have horrified her mother, sopping up egg yolk with biscuit and not caring about manners. "Better," Martha said approvingly. "Can't work on an empty stomach, and there's plenty to do. What do you need from me?" "First, I need to know what you actually know how to do. You said you managed your father's household, but that could mean anything from giving orders to actually working. Which was it?" Evelyn considered lying, making herself sound more capable than she was. But Martha's eyes were too knowing, and she was tired of pretending. "Both," she said honestly. "My mother taught me household management before she died, planning menus, managing budgets, overseeing staff. But after she was gone, when my father's finances started to fail, we had to let people go. By the end, it was just me and a cook who came in twice a week. I did everything else myself. So you can actually cook, not just plan meals. Simple things. Nothing fancy. I can make bread stews, basic roasts. I can preserve vegetables, do laundry, mend clothes." Martha's expression softened. "That's more than I expected, honestly. A lot of society girls come west thinking they can run a house without knowing which end of a broom to hold. I stopped being a society girl a long time ago." "Good. Because out here we all work, no room for airs or delicate sensibilities." Martha poured herself more coffee and sat down across from Evelyn. "Here's how things run. I handle most of the cooking for the hands' breakfast before dawn, dinner at noon, supper after dark. The men eat in the bunkhouse mostly, but Cole takes his meals here. You'll be helping me with food preparation, cleaning, laundry, and garden work. The vegetable garden needs constant attention in this climate, watering mostly and battling the rabbits." "I can do all that." "There's also the books. Cole mentioned you know accounting." "My father taught me. Basic bookkeeping, reconciling accounts, tracking expenditures." "Thank God," Martha said fervently. "Cole's been handling the books himself and making a hash of it. He's smart enough, but his mind doesn't work that way. Last month, he somehow recorded the same supply order 3 different times and nearly shorted the hands' wages because he couldn't figure out where the money went." Despite everything, Evelyn felt a smile tug at her lips. "I can help with that." "You'll be a godsend if you can." Martha stood, collected their plates. "Come on, let me show you how things work around here." The next several hours passed in a blur of information. Martha walked her through the kitchen, showing her where supplies were kept, explaining the rhythms of meal preparation for hungry ranch hands who burned through food like wildfire through dry grass. The larder was well stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt, pork, coffee. A spring house kept milk and butter cold. The garden behind the main house grew vegetables that seemed to thrive despite the heat: tomatoes, squash, onions, peppers. "We trade with neighbors for what we can't grow," Martha explained. "And once a month, Cole or Frank goes to town for supplies: sugar, coffee, fabric, things like that." They moved through the house room by room. Besides the kitchen and Evelyn's small bedroom, there was a front room with a few worn chairs and a desk buried under papers, and Cole's room, which Martha pointed to but didn't enter. "He's private about his space. Best to knock if you ever need something." Upstairs was mostly storage and one unused room that Martha said had been meant for hired help that never materialized. The attic held trunks and equipment that hadn't seen use in years. "It's not much," Martha said as they returned to the kitchen, "but it's solid. Cole built most of it himself when he was barely 20. "How did he end up here?" Evelyn asked. "If that's not too personal." Martha busied herself kneading dough, her hands working the mass with practiced efficiency. "Like I said yesterday, that's his story to tell. But I will say, he came west young after losing everything back east. Worked as a ranch hand for years, saved every penny, and bought this land when the previous owner couldn't make the payments. That was 8 years ago. He's built it up from near nothing. And now someone wants to take it from him. Harlan Price wants to take everything from everyone," Martha said, her voice sharp. "Man's got more money than sense and more greed than decency. He sees a piece of land he wants, he finds a way to get it, usually legal but barely. What's his interest in this place specifically?" "Water." The creek that runs through Cole's property feeds into the river that runs through Price's land. Right now they share it peaceable enough, but if Price owned both properties, he'd control the whole water system for 10 miles. Could charge whatever he wanted for water rights or cut off his neighbors entirely. Evelyn felt a chill despite the warm kitchen. That's monstrous. That's business, according to him. Martha shaped the dough into loaves with sharp, angry movements. And the law's on his side, mostly. That's why Cole needed the homestead claim. It would give him legal precedent for water rights that even Price couldn't break. But it required being married, and Cole's been too busy keeping this place running to court anyone proper. So he settled for me. Martha stopped, turned to look at her directly. He didn't settle. He made a choice. And from what I can see, it's not a bad one for either of you. Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of hoofbeats approached fast. Martha's head snapped up, concern creasing her face. That's too quick. The men shouldn't be back yet. They hurried to the front window. A single rider was approaching, pushing his horse hard. As he got closer, Evelyn recognized Sam, the young ranch hand she'd met briefly yesterday. He reined in before the house and dismounted in a stumble of haste. Martha opened the door before he could knock. "What's wrong?" "Need Mrs. Tanner," Sam panted. "There's been trouble at the north pasture. Cole sent me back." Evelyn's heart lurched. What kind of trouble? Fences cut, cattle scattered, looks deliberate. Sam's young face was tight with anger and worry. "Cole wants you to ride back with me, ma'am. Says you need to see it yourself, being as you're part of this now." "Me?" Evelyn's voice came out higher than intended. I can't ride." Sam and Martha exchanged glances. "Can't ride at all?" Martha asked. "I've ridden in the park in Philadelphia, side saddle on groomed paths, not—" She gestured vaguely toward the vast, rough landscape beyond the window. "No time to teach you proper," Sam said. "But the mare I brought's gentle. If you can sit a saddle and hold on, she'll follow my horse." Evelyn wanted to refuse, wanted to say this was too much too fast, that she'd only been married a day and couldn't possibly be expected to ride out to deal with ranch disasters. But Martha was already pulling a split riding skirt from somewhere and thrusting it at her. "Change quick. If Cole sent for you, he's got a reason. And Sam's right, you're part of this now." 10 minutes later, Evelyn found herself mounted on a placid bay mare, wearing Martha's riding skirt and trying not to think about how high off the ground she was. The saddle felt precarious and strange, nothing like the genteel side saddle she'd used in Philadelphia. Sam had adjusted the stirrups as best he could, but her legs still felt awkward and exposed. "Just hold the reins loose and let Daisy follow," Sam instructed. "She knows the way. I'll keep the pace easy." Easy, Evelyn discovered, was relative. What Sam considered easy had her bouncing in the saddle and gripping the horn with white knuckles. But Daisy was indeed gentle patient with her inexperienced rider, and after the first terrifying minutes, Evelyn found a rhythm that was less painful. The ride to the north pasture took almost an hour. Sam pointed out landmarks as they went, filling the silence with a running commentary that Evelyn suspected was meant to distract her from her discomfort. "That's Miller's Creek, usually runs year-round. Those hills to the east, that's where the wild horses sometimes graze. Cole's been trying to catch a black stallion up there for 2 years, but the thing's smart as a fox." As they crested a low rise, Evelyn saw the men gathered near a fence line. Cole stood apart from the others, hands on hips, staring at something on the ground. He looked up as they approached, and Evelyn saw the tension in his shoulders, the hard set of his jaw. Sam helped her dismount. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground and she walked stiffly toward her husband. The other men nodded respectfully but kept their distance, giving Cole and Evelyn a bubble of privacy. "Thank you for coming," Cole said without preamble. "I know this isn't what you expected. What happened?" He gestured toward the fence. 3 posts had been cut clean through the wire strung between them, snipped in multiple places. Beyond the broken fence, the pasture stretched empty. Had 60 head of cattle in this pasture yesterday. This morning fence was cut and the cattle gone. Frank and the boys are tracking them now, but whoever did this had all night to move them. Rustlers. Maybe. Or maybe someone trying to send a message. His eyes were hard. Either way, it's a problem. 60 head represents most of our saleable stock for the year. Without them, we can't make the mortgage payment in the fall. Evelyn's mind raced. Can you track them? Get them back. If we find them quick enough, yes. But the territory's big, and there's 100 places to hide stolen cattle. He paused, studying her face. I brought you out here because you need to understand what you've married into. This isn't just a ranch. It's a fight, and the people we're fighting don't play fair. You think this was Price? I know it was Price, or men working for him. He's done this before to other small ranchers. Cuts fences, scatters stock, makes it impossible to keep up with payments and improvements. Then he swoops in and buys the land for pennies when they're desperate. That's illegal. Proving it is the problem. He's careful. Uses intermediaries. By the time you could get the law involved, the damage is done, and he's nowhere near it. Cole's frustration was evident in every line of his body. The homestead claim was supposed to protect us, give us legal standing that Price couldn't touch. But now he's escalating, Evelyn finished, because we got married, because his plan to block the claim won't work anymore. Exactly. Cole looked at her with something like respect. You're quick. I'm my father's daughter. The words came out bitter. He taught me how desperate men think, how they cut corners and break rules when they feel trapped. She met Cole's eyes. What do? We find the cattle, we fix the fence, and we make damn sure that when the claim inspector comes next month, everything is perfect. So perfect that Price can't find a single thing to challenge. He hesitated. But I need to know, are you with me on this? Really with me, because it's going to get worse before it gets better. Evelyn thought about Philadelphia, about running, about the exhaustion of always being afraid. She thought about the marriage certificate folded in her bag upstairs, about the room that was hers now, about Martha's kindness, and the way these men had nodded to her with respect this morning. I'm with you, she said. But I need to know everything. No more secrets about what we're up against. Cole studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough. Come on, let me show you the rest. They walked along the broken fence line while Cole explained the layout of the ranch, the property boundaries, the water rights that made this land so valuable. Frank rode up while they were talking, his horse lathered with sweat. Found tracks heading southeast, he reported. At least 3 riders moving the herd fast. They've got maybe 8 hours on us. Can we catch them? Maybe. If we ride hard and don't stop. But that means leaving the ranch short-handed, and if this was a diversion, they could hit somewhere else while we're gone, Cole finished grimly. He cursed under his breath. All right, Frank takes Sam and Joey. Track them as far as you can before dark. If you can get the cattle back without a fight, do it. If not, mark where they're holed up and come back. We'll figure out the next move with more information. What about you? I'm staying here. Someone needs to guard the home place, and I need to start repairing this fence before more stock wanders through. He glanced at Evelyn. And I need to bring my wife home safe. Frank nodded and rode off to gather the others. Within minutes, 3 men were mounted and heading southeast at a hard gallop. The remaining hands, there were only 2 left now, looked to Cole for instruction. Pete Miguel, I want you riding the southern property line every hour until dark. If you see anything suspicious, anyone who doesn't belong, you come back and report. Don't confront them alone. Understood. Yes, boss. They chorused and rode off. Cole turned to Evelyn. Can you ride back alone if I point you in the right direction? I need to start on this fence. She wanted to say yes, wanted to be capable and independent, but the truth was she'd barely managed the ride out here with Sam leading the way. I don't think so. Not safely. He nodded, no judgment in his expression. Then you'll stay with me. Can you hand me tools while I work? It'll make things faster. Of course. For the next 3 hours, Evelyn learned more about fence repair than she'd ever imagined possible. Cole worked with focused efficiency, digging out the cut posts, setting new ones, stretching wire, with a tool that looked like a medieval torture device. She handed him nails, pliers, wire cutters, learning the names and purposes of each tool. The sun climbed higher, turning the world into a furnace, and sweat soaked through her borrowed clothing. They didn't talk much. Cole was concentrated on his work, and Evelyn was too busy trying not to collapse from heat exhaustion to make conversation. But there was something companionable about the silence, about working toward a common goal without needing to fill the air with words. Finally, as the sun passed its peak and began the slow descent toward afternoon, Cole stepped back to survey his work. The fence was repaired, the wire taut and strong. That'll hold. he said with satisfaction. Let's get you home. The ride back was marginally less terrifying than the ride out, mostly because Evelyn was too exhausted to be properly afraid. She swayed in the saddle, half dozing, trusting Daisy to follow Cole's horse. When they finally reached the ranch, Martha came out to meet them, her face creased with worry. Thank God, I've been imagining all sorts of disasters. Just the one disaster, Cole said dryly. He helped Evelyn down from the saddle. She bit back a groan as her protesting muscles stretched and handed Daisy's reins to Martha. Can you take care of her? I need to tend to the horses. Go, I've got her. Martha put an arm around Evelyn's waist, half supporting her toward the house. You did good, honey. First day as a rancher's wife and you're already out fixing fences. I mostly just stood there and handed him things. That's more than some would do. Come on, you need water and food and probably a long sit-down. In the kitchen, Martha pressed cool water and leftover biscuits into Evelyn's hands, while she sank into a chair with a gratefulness that bordered on religious. Every muscle in her body ached. Parts of her she hadn't known existed were screaming in protest. First time on a horse like that'll do that to you, Martha said sympathetically. You'll be sore for days, but it gets easier. Does it have to get easier? Can't I just never ride again? Martha laughed. Out here, not likely, but don't worry, you'll toughen up faster than you think. Cole came in a few minutes later, having washed at the pump. He looked tired, but less tense than he had at the fence line. Martha, can you manage supper alone tonight? I need Evelyn to look at the account books. Now, Martha's eyebrows rose. She's dead on her feet. I know, but if we're going to face down Price's lawyers when the inspector comes, we need the books perfect. And based on what I saw of Evelyn today, she's tougher than she looks. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to insist on rest, but something in his tone stopped her. He wasn't being cruel or demanding. He was treating her like a partner, like someone capable of pushing through discomfort for the good of their shared goal. Show me, she said. The account books were worse than she'd imagined. Cole had been keeping records, but they were scattered across multiple ledgers with no clear system. Some expenses were recorded twice, some not at all. Income from cattle sales was mixed in with loan payments, and several pages had notes in the margins that contradicted the official entries. Cole, she said after 20 minutes of studying the mess, this is really bad. He grimaced. I know, numbers aren't my strength. It's not just that you're bad at this. It's that what's here won't satisfy any inspector. They'll take one look at these books and assume you're either incompetent or hiding something. She flipped through more pages, her accountant's mind cataloging the errors. We need to start over. Create a clean ledger with everything properly categorized and dated. Can you do that? Yes, but I'll need receipts, bills of sale, any paperwork you've kept. And I'll need to know every transaction you remember that isn't recorded. That could take weeks. Then we'd better start now. They worked until the light failed Cole, pulling out boxes of crumpled receipts and faded bills, while Evelyn began the painstaking process of creating order from chaos. Martha brought them supper stew and bread eaten at the desk while they worked, and coffee that kept them alert as the hours stretched. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, Evelyn realized she was enjoying herself. The work was familiar, soothing in its logic. Numbers didn't lie or cheat or change their nature. They simply were, and if you handled them correctly, they told a clear story. She'd always loved that about accounting back when she'd helped her father, before his numbers had started lying to hide his desperation. You're smiling, Cole observed. I didn't think anyone smiled while doing books. I like making sense of things, creating order. She glanced at him. And honestly, after today, the fence, the ride, the heat sitting here with a ledger feels like a vacation. He smiled a real smile this time that softened his whole face. You're strange, you know that. I've been called worse. They worked another hour before Cole finally called a halt. That's enough for tonight. You've done more today than I had any right to ask. Evelyn stretched, feeling every vertebra in her spine pop. When do you think Frank will be back? Tomorrow probably, maybe the day after if the trail's long. His face grew serious. Depending on what he finds, we might have bigger problems. What do you mean? If they moved those cattle onto Price's land, we can't just take them back. That'd be trespassing, maybe cattle theft from our end. We'd have to go through the law, and Price has most of the law in his pocket. So we'd lose them. Most likely. That's not fair. No, Cole agreed quietly. It's not. But fair doesn't count for much out here. Power counts. Money counts. And Price has both. Evelyn thought about her father again, about the wealthy men who'd testified against him at trial, who'd painted him as a villain while protecting their own corrupt dealings, about the judge who'd been in their pockets, the jury who'd been swayed by expensive lawyers and social pressure. Then we make our own power, she said firmly. We get these books perfect. We make this place so obviously a family homestead that no inspector could possibly deny the claim. We document everything, invite people from town to see how we're improving the land. We make it undeniable. Cole looked at her with something she couldn't quite name, surprise perhaps, or admiration. You really are with me on this. I told you I was. People say things they don't mean all the time. I'm not people. I'm your wife. She said it firmly, claiming the title for the first time without hesitation. And whatever else this marriage is or isn't, we're partners now. Your fight is my fight. He was quiet for a long moment, his storm cloud eyes searching hers. Then he said very softly, "Thank you." They stood there in the lamplight, exhausted and dirty and bound together by ink on paper and shared necessity. Outside, the night sounds of the ranch settled around them, horses shifting in the barn, the wind whispering through the cottonwood, the distant howl of a coyote. Get some rest, Cole said finally. Tomorrow starts early. In her small room, Evelyn changed into her nightdress and fell into bed with a gratitude that bordered on worship. Her body ached. Her mind spun with numbers and worry, but underneath it all was something unexpected. Purpose. For the first time since her father's arrest, she felt like she was part of something larger than her own survival. She was building something, fighting for something, choosing something, instead of just running away. She fell asleep thinking about fence posts and ledger entries and the way Cole had smiled when she'd said his fight was her fight. In her dreams, Philadelphia burned to ash and blew away on a western wind, leaving nothing but clean desert and endless sky. Morning came too soon and too bright. Evelyn woke to every muscle screaming her inner thighs, especially raw from yesterday's ride. Getting out of bed required a series of pained movements that would have been comedic if they hadn't hurt so much. Martha took one look at her stiff gait and started laughing. Told you you'd be sore. Here. She handed Evelyn a small jar. Salve. It'll help with the saddle rash, and don't worry, it gets better after the first week. Week, Evelyn croaked. Week, Martha confirmed cheerfully. Now, come on. There's breakfast to make and a garden that won't wait. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Evelyn woke before dawn, helped Martha prepare breakfast for the hands, then spent the morning working through the account books. Cole would appear periodically with more receipts or to answer questions about transactions, but mostly he was out working the ranch with the 2 remaining hands. The place felt emptier without Frank and the others, and Evelyn caught herself listening for hoofbeats, wondering if they'd found the cattle. Afternoons were devoted to the physical work, the garden laundry, cleaning, food, preparation. Evelyn's hands grew rough and red, her arms ached from hauling water, and she fell into bed each night too exhausted to think. But slowly, painfully, she was learning. How to work with Martha's rhythms in the kitchen. How to tell when the bread dough had risen enough. How to pick vegetables at their peak without damaging the plants. How to make coffee strong enough to satisfy ranch hands without it being actual mud. And in the evenings, when the heat finally broke and the western sky turned gold, she and Cole would return to the books. They talked about the ranch's finances, about his plans for expansion, about the water rights and land boundaries. He taught her the economics of cattle ranching, how many head per acre, how long to raise calves before sale, how to calculate profit margins on beef at various market prices. You're a good teacher, she said one evening, watching him sketch a diagram of the property's water system. You're a good student. He looked up, met her eyes. And a good partner. I meant to say that earlier, thank you for taking this seriously. A lot of people in your position would have just gone through the motions. This is my life now, too. Why wouldn't I take it seriously? He smiled slightly. Most society girls would rather die than admit they needed to work. I'm not most society girls. She said it firmly, meaning it. The girl who'd arrived at the ranch gate 4 days ago felt like a stranger now, soft and naive. This version of herself, sunburned and calloused and learning to function on too little sleep, felt more real somehow. On the fourth morning after the fence cutting, Frank and the others finally rode in just after dawn. Evelyn was in the kitchen helping Martha knead dough when she heard the horses. She and Martha exchanged glances and hurried outside. Cole was already there, striding toward the returning men. Frank dismounted slowly, moving like someone who'd spent too many hours in the saddle. His face was grim. "Found them," he said without preamble. "About 30 miles southeast on land that borders Price's property. Men guarding them weren't Price's regular hands, looked like hired guns from across the border. Can we get them back?" Frank shook his head. "Not without a fight, and they're dug in pretty well. We'd need 20 men at least, and even then it'd be bloody." Cole's jaw tightened. "So we lost them?" "Not necessarily. I talked to the sheriff in Silver Creek on the way back. Told him what we found. He's willing to ride out with deputies, but he needs proof the cattle are ours." "We have bills of sale," Evelyn said, stepping forward. Both men turned to look at her. "In the account books, every head of cattle purchased or born on this ranch is documented. I can pull the records." Frank's weathered face split into a grin. "You married smart, Cole." "Don't I know it?" Cole replied, and Evelyn felt warmth flood her cheeks. She spent the next hour pulling every cattle-related document she could find, organizing them into a folder that proved ownership beyond doubt. Cole rode to town with the evidence, and by evening word came back the sheriff would handle it. The cattle would be returned within a week, and questions would be asked about the men guarding them. "It's not enough," Cole said that night over supper. "Even if we get the cattle back, Price will just try something else. And next time might be worse." "So what do we do?" Evelyn asked. Cole looked at her, then at Martha, then out the window toward the half-built homestead claim house. "We make ourselves unassailable. We finish that house. We get the books perfect. We invite every respectable person in Silver Creek to see what we've built. When the inspector comes, there won't be a single thing Price can challenge. We'll have done everything by the letter of the law, and then some." "That's a lot of work in 3 weeks," Martha said dubiously. "Then we'd better not waste time," Cole replied. What followed was the hardest work Evelyn had ever done in her life. Cole threw himself into finishing the homestead house, working from first light until dark. The remaining hands helped when they could, and Evelyn found herself learning basic carpentry, how to hold boards steady while Cole nailed them, how to hand him the right tool before he asked for it, how to read his need for water or rest before he admitted to it. The books consumed her evenings. Every transaction for the past 3 years had to be verified, documented, and recorded in perfect copperplate handwriting. She cross-referenced receipts with bank statements, tracked down missing paperwork, and wrote letters to suppliers confirming dates and amounts. Her eyes burned from working by lamplight, and her hand cramped from writing, but slowly the chaos resolved into clarity. And through it all, something was shifting between her and Cole. The wariness that had characterized their first days was softening into something easier. They worked in comfortable silence, now anticipating each other's needs. He started asking her opinion on decisions about the ranch, and listening when she answered. She began to understand his moods when he needed space to think, when he needed someone to talk through a problem with, when he was frustrated with himself for not being faster or better. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the wedding, they were working on the house by lamplight. The last boards were going up on the interior walls, and the place was finally starting to look like a home instead of a skeleton. Evelyn held a board steady while Cole secured it, and when he stepped back to admire the work, she saw something in his face that made her heart skip pride, yes, but also hope. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's solid," he corrected. "Beautiful is for parlors and gardens. This is a working house. It can be both." He looked at her, really looked, and she was suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the lamplight cast shadows that made his features seem softer. "You surprise me," he said quietly. "Every day you surprise me. How I expected you to hate this. The work, the isolation, the rough living. Instead, He gestured helplessly. "You've made it yours. Made this place yours. Made yourself part of it. It's my home now. she said simply. Why would I hate my home? A lot of women would. I'm not. Most women I know. He smiled. You've said that before. And you're right. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, and it made something in Evelyn's chest tighten with an emotion she wasn't ready to name. Then the moment broke. Cole stepped back, cleared his throat. We should head in. Tomorrow's Sunday church in town. People need to see us together established. Right. The performance. The necessary theater of being a married couple. Evelyn nodded, pushed down the strange disappointment that rose in her throat. This was a business arrangement. Partners, not lovers. She needed to remember that. But as they walked back to the main house under a sky brilliant with stars, she wondered if Cole was finding it as hard to remember as she was. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the desert look almost gentle. Evelyn stood before the small mirror in her room, trying to make herself presentable for church with limited resources. She'd washed and pressed the calico dress Martha had given her, pinned her hair into something resembling a respectable style, and even managed to buff some of the roughness from her work-worn hands. But looking at her reflection, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her skin had bronzed despite her efforts to stay shaded. Her face had thinned, and there was something different in her eyes. Something harder and more certain than the desperate girl who'd arrived at the ranch gate 2 weeks ago. Martha appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her Sunday best. You look lovely, honey, but here, she held out a simple gold band. You'll want to wear this. People will notice if you're not wearing a ring. Evelyn took the band, surprised by its weight. Where did this come from? It was mine. My John gave it to me when we married. I want you to have it at least for today. Martha's eyes were soft. A wife needs a ring even if the marriage started strange. The band slid onto Evelyn's finger with surprising ease, as if it had been made for her. She touched it gently, feeling the worn smoothness of gold that had been loved and worn for years. Thank you. I'll take good care of it. I know you will. Now come on. Cole's got the wagon ready, and he hates being late. Cole was indeed waiting, dressed in clothes Evelyn hadn't seen before. Dark trousers, a white shirt that looked freshly laundered, and a black vest that made him look almost formal. He'd shaved and combed his hair back, and the transformation from ranch hand to respectable gentleman was startling. He helped both women into the wagon with careful courtesy, and Evelyn caught Martha's approving nod. The ride to Silver Creek took nearly an hour. Cole drove in silence, his jaw set with tension that Evelyn was learning meant he was preparing for something difficult. As they approached the town, she understood why. Several wagons and horses were already gathered outside the white-painted church, and people were clustered in small groups talking. When Cole's wagon appeared, conversation stopped. Heads turned. Evelyn felt the weight of dozens of eyes assessing her, judging her, measuring her against whatever standards this community held. Remember, Cole said quietly, helping her down. We're newly married and establishing a homestead. We're respectable, hardworking, and here to stay. Don't let anyone rattle you. I survived Philadelphia society, Evelyn replied, straightening her spine. I can handle Arizona gossip. His lips quirked slightly. That's my girl. The words sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, but there was no time to examine it. A woman was approaching middle-aged and formidable in black silk with a face that suggested she'd been born disapproving. Cole Tanner, I heard rumors you'd gotten married, but I had to see it to believe it. Her eyes swept over Evelyn with the precision of a jeweler examining a questionable stone. And who might this be? Mrs. Thornton. May I present my wife, Evelyn? Evelyn, this is Mrs. Thornton. She runs the general store with her husband. How do you do? Evelyn said, extending her hand with all the grace her mother had drilled into her years ago. Mrs. Thornton's handshake was brief and assessing. You're not from around here. I can tell by your speech. Back east, Philadelphia. My goodness, that's quite a journey. However did you and Cole meet? The question was loaded with suspicion, and Evelyn could see other women drifting closer to hear the answer. This was the test then, the first of many. Through correspondence, Evelyn said smoothly, the lie she and Cole had agreed upon. My father knew Cole's family years ago before they came west. When I found myself in need of a fresh start, he suggested I write to Cole. We discovered we had compatible goals for building a life in the territory. It was close enough to truth to be believable, vague enough to discourage detailed questions. Mrs. Thornton's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. Well, welcome to Silver Creek, Mrs. Tanner. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other. She drifted away and immediately another woman approached. Then another. Evelyn shook hands, answered questions, and performed the delicate dance of being friendly without being too familiar, respectable without being proud. Cole stayed close, his hand occasionally touching her elbow in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt protective. She was grateful for his presence, for the solid reality of him beside her in this sea of curiosity and judgment. The church bell rang, calling them inside. The building was simple, just wooden pews and whitewashed walls with a pulpit at the front, and windows that let in streams of dusty sunlight. Cole guided Evelyn to a pew about halfway up, and as they sat, she noticed people arranging themselves in careful social order. The wealthiest families near the front, the working folks in the middle, the most marginalized toward the back. And in the very front pew, impossible to miss, sat a man who could only be Harlan Price. He was perhaps 50, with silver threading through dark hair and a bearing that spoke of wealth and power. His suit was expensive, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and when he turned to survey the congregation, his eyes were cold and assessing. They paused on Cole and Evelyn, and something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps or calculation. Then he smiled, and it was the smile of a predator spotting new prey. "That's him," Cole murmured, barely moving his lips. "Don't react, just look straight ahead." Evelyn fixed her eyes on the pulpit, her heart hammering. This was the man trying to destroy them, trying to steal what Cole had built with years of backbreaking work. This was the enemy, and he was sitting 20 feet away looking prosperous and untouchable. The service began with hymns that Evelyn half remembered from childhood. Her voice was rusty, but she joined in, letting the familiar words wash over her. The pastor, a thin man with kind eyes and a Boston accent, preached about the value of honest work and building communities of mutual support. Several times, his gaze seemed to rest meaningfully on specific members of the congregation, and Evelyn wondered what dramas and tensions simmered beneath Silver Creek's surface. After the benediction, people filed out slowly, clustering in the churchyard to socialize. Cole kept Evelyn close as they navigated the crowd, introducing her to merchants and ranchers, teachers and tradesmen. She smiled until her face ached, answered the same questions over and over, and tried to memorize names and faces. Then a hand touched her arm, and she turned to find herself facing Harlan Price. Up close, he was even more imposing. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His smile was charming, his voice smooth as silk. "Mrs. Tanner, I presume." "Harlan Price. I own the Bar P Ranch south of your husband's property." He took her hand before she could decide whether to offer it, brought it nearly to his lips in an old-fashioned gesture. "May I say Cole is a lucky man. I had no idea he was courting anyone." "It was rather sudden," Evelyn managed, reclaiming her hand. "So I understand. News travels fast in a small territory." His eyes held hers, and there was something unsettling in their depths, amusement, maybe, or contempt barely concealed. "I hope you'll find Arizona to your liking. It can be harsh for those unused to frontier life." "I'm finding it suits me quite well, thank you." "I'm delighted to hear it. Of course, ranching is difficult even for those born to it. So many things can go wrong, weather, disease, accidents. Why, just recently I heard Cole had some trouble with scattered cattle. Such a shame when honest work is disrupted by misfortune." The implication was clear as glass. Evelyn felt anger rise hot in her throat, but Cole's hand tightened warningly on her arm. "We recovered them," Cole said evenly. "With the sheriff's help. Turns out they'd wandered onto land near yours, being guarded by men nobody seemed to recognize. Funny thing that." Price's smile never wavered. "How fortunate. Though I wonder how long your luck will hold given all the challenges facing your homestead claim. I understand the inspection is coming soon." "In 2 weeks. Everything's in order." "I'm sure you believe that. Still, the requirements are quite specific. A proper family homestead, they say. Permanent residence evidence of domestic establishment, proof of ongoing improvement." His gaze flicked to Evelyn, then back to Cole. "I do hope everything is as it should be. Would hate to see you lose what you've worked for over some technical detail." "We'll be fine," Evelyn said firmly before Cole could respond. "Our home is well established, our records are impeccable, and we're very much committed to building our life here. I'm sure the inspector will find everything more than satisfactory." Price's eyes sharpened with interest. "You handle the records, Mrs. Tanner?" "How modern. So many wives leave such things to their husbands." "So many wives weren't trained in bookkeeping by their fathers. I assure you, Mr. Price, I'm quite capable." "I don't doubt it." He tipped his hat. "Well, I won't monopolize your time. I'm sure you have many people eager to meet the new Mrs. Tanner. Cole, always a pleasure. Do give my regards to your ranch hands, especially Frank. I understand he had quite the adventure tracking down your wayward cattle." He moved away smoothly, and Evelyn realized her hands were clenched into fists. Cole gently uncurled her fingers, his own hand steady and warm. "Easy. You did well. Better than well, you stood your ground without escalating. That's exactly what we needed." "He's vile. The way he smiled while threatening us. That's how men like him operate. All charm on the surface, poison underneath." Cole's jaw was tight. "But you were right to emphasize the records. If there's one thing that might worry him, it's that we've got our paperwork in perfect order. Men like Price are used to finding weaknesses in documentation using legal technicalities to their advantage. If we've closed those gaps, we've taken away one of his weapons." They made their way back to the wagon, having satisfied the social requirements of the morning. But as Cole helped Evelyn up, a young woman approached, moving with the careful dignity of someone acutely aware of their social position. "Mr. Tanner, I'm sorry to intrude." She was perhaps 19, pretty in a delicate way, with blonde hair and nervous hands. "I'm Rebecca Mills. My father owns the feed store." "I remember. How can I help you, Miss Mills?" "It's just, I wanted to say congratulations on your marriage, and—" She glanced at Evelyn, her cheeks pinking. "I wanted to apologize. I know there were some who thought, that is, there was talk that perhaps you and I might—" She trailed off miserably. Understanding dawned on Evelyn with uncomfortable clarity. This girl had harbored hopes about Cole, or her family had harbored hopes on her behalf, and Cole's sudden marriage had crushed those expectations. "Miss Mills," Evelyn said gently, "there's no need to apologize. I'm sure you've been nothing but kind, and I hope we can be friends. I could certainly use friends here in Silver Creek." Rebecca's eyes brightened with gratitude. "I'd like that very much, Mrs. Tanner, truly. And if you ever need anything or just someone to talk to, my father's store is always open." After she hurried away, Evelyn looked at Cole. "Were you courting her?" "No, but her father made his interest clear and I didn't discourage it firmly enough. I should have." He sighed. "I've never been good at that kind of thing, managing expectations, navigating social subtleties. I just wanted to be left alone to work my ranch. And now you have a wife to handle the social subtleties. And now I have a wife who's better at it than I could ever be." He agreed. "Thank you for being kind to her. You didn't have to be. She's just a girl caught up in circumstances beyond her control. I know how that feels." The ride home was quieter. Martha dozed in the back of the wagon while Cole drove, and Evelyn found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with casual competence, the small scar above his left eyebrow that she'd never asked about. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow in question. "Just thinking," she said, "about how strange this all is. 3 weeks ago, I'd never heard of you. Now I'm defending your honor to powerful ranchers and consoling disappointed former prospects." "Regret it?" The question was casual, but she sensed the weight behind it. "No," she said honestly. "It's hard and it's strange, and I still don't know what I'm doing half the time, but I don't regret it. Do you?" "No." He said it firmly, without hesitation. "You've been—" He paused, searching for words. "You've been more than I hoped for, more than I had any right to expect." The words settled warm in her chest, and she found herself smiling. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they reached the ranch, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in months, the simple pleasure of coming home. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. The cattle were returned as promised, minus a few head that had wandered or been slaughtered, but the bulk of the herd was intact. Frank and the hands worked overtime repairing fence lines and checking for other vulnerabilities. Cole threw himself into finishing the homestead house, and Evelyn spent every spare moment on the account books. 3 days before the inspection, the house was finally complete. It wasn't large, just 4 rooms and a loft, but it was solid and well built with real glass windows and a stone fireplace that Cole had laid himself. Martha helped Evelyn move some furniture from the main house, a bed, table chairs. Basic necessities that would prove the space was lived in and functional. "Should we actually move in?" Evelyn asked as they arranged quilts on the bed. "Before the inspection." "Probably should," Martha said. "Make it look natural. You've been married 3 weeks. It'd be strange if you were still in separate rooms in the main house." Evelyn's stomach flipped. "You mean, you should sleep here in this house together. Whether you share a bed or one of you takes the floor is your business. But the inspector will look for signs of genuine habitation, and that means both of you here." That evening, as the sun set in brilliant orange and purple, Cole found Evelyn standing in the doorway of the completed house. She'd swept the floors, arranged the furniture, even picked wildflowers and put them in a jar on the table. The space felt almost cozy in the fading light. "It's ready," she said. "We could move in tonight if you want. Give us a few days to make it look lived in before the inspection." Cole stepped inside, looking around with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've made it nice. Homey." That was the idea. She hesitated. "Martha suggested we should both stay here, to make it convincing." "Makes sense." His voice was carefully neutral. "I can take the floor, or rig up something in the loft if you'd prefer more privacy. The bed's big enough for both of us. We're adults. We can share a bed without—" She stopped, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "Without making it complicated," Cole finished. "Yeah, we can do that." But standing there in the gathering dark in the house they'd built together, Evelyn wasn't sure anything about this arrangement was simple anymore. She'd started to look forward to their evening conversations over the account books. Started to notice the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his voice softened when he talked about his plans for the ranch. Started to feel something that went beyond partnership or convenience, something that made her heart beat faster when he was near. She pushed the thoughts away. This was a business arrangement, a marriage of necessity. She couldn't let herself forget that, couldn't let herself want more than what they'd agreed to. That night they moved their few belongings into the new house. It felt strange and intimate, this final step into the fiction of their marriage. Cole banked the fire in the fireplace, while Evelyn changed into her nightdress behind a privacy screen Martha had lent them. When she emerged, he'd already turned down the lamp and was lying on the far edge of the bed, his back to the center, giving her as much space as possible. She slid under the quilts on her side, maintaining a careful distance between them. The mattress dipped slightly with their combined weight, wanting to roll them together, but they both held firm to their edges. "Good night," Cole said quietly into the darkness. "Good night." Evelyn lay awake for a long time, listening to his breathing slow and even, out into sleep. She'd shared a house with this man for weeks now, worked beside him, eaten meals with him, planned and strategized with him. But this lying in the dark, hearing the intimate sounds of his sleep, felt different, more real somehow, more like an actual marriage. She finally drifted off and woke once in the deep hours of the night to find she'd rolled to the center of the bed. Cole's arm was draped over her waist, his body curled around hers in sleep, and for a moment she froze, uncertain whether to move away or stay still. He was warm and solid, and she felt safer than she had since leaving Philadelphia. Almost without thinking, she let herself relax back against him just for a moment, just for tonight. When morning came, they were on opposite edges of the bed again, the space between them carefully maintained. Neither mentioned the night, and Evelyn wondered if he even remembered. The day of the inspection arrived with cloudless sky and oppressive heat. Evelyn woke before dawn, nerves singing with anxiety. She'd gone over every detail 100 times. The books were perfect. The house was clean, the ranch showed clear evidence of improvement and family establishment. But Price's words haunted her, that smooth confidence that suggested he knew something they didn't. She dressed carefully in her best dress, the one she'd worn to the wedding, cleaned and pressed until it looked almost new. Cole wore his Sunday clothes, and together they looked like a respectable married couple building a life on the frontier, which Evelyn supposed they were. even if that life had started under unusual circumstances. The inspector arrived at 10 o'clock, a government man named Harrison, with steel-rimmed spectacles and a leather satchel full of documents. He was younger than Evelyn expected, perhaps 35, with the officious manner of someone who took his position very seriously. "Mr. and Mrs. Tanner, thank you for making time to meet with me today." He shook their hands formally. "I'll need to review your paperwork, inspect the homestead property, and ask some questions about your domestic arrangements. Shouldn't take more than a few hours." "We're happy to cooperate fully," Cole said. "Would you like to start with the paperwork or the property inspection?" "Paperwork first, I think. May we sit somewhere comfortable?" They settled in the main house's front room, and Evelyn brought out the account books she'd spent weeks perfecting. Harrison opened them with the careful attention of a man trained to spot discrepancies, and Evelyn held her breath as he turned pages, scanning entries, cross-referencing dates and amounts. "These are very thorough," he said after several minutes. "Quite well organized. Who maintains these records?" "I do," Evelyn said. "I was trained in bookkeeping by my father." "And you've been married how long?" 3 weeks tomorrow." His eyebrows rose slightly. "These entries go back 3 years. Obviously, you weren't maintaining them the entire time." "No. When I arrived, the records were somewhat disorganized. I've been reconstructing and organizing them to create a clearer picture of the ranch's financial health and ongoing improvements." "I see." He made a note. "And what was your motivation for marrying Mr. Tanner?" "Forgive the personal question, but the timing is relevant to the homestead claim." Evelyn had prepared for this. "We'd been corresponding for several months after a family connection put us in touch. When circumstances in Philadelphia made it clear I needed a fresh start, and Cole indicated he was ready to settle down and build a proper family homestead, the timing seemed right for both of us." "You came from Philadelphia specifically to marry Mr. Tanner." "I came west for multiple reasons. Marrying Cole was one of them." Harrison made more notes, his face unreadable. Then he closed the books and stood. "Let's look at the homestead property." They walked to the new house, and Evelyn's heart pounded as Harrison inspected every detail. He checked the foundation, the walls, the roof. He opened cupboards and drawers, noting the supplies and personal items that proved occupancy. He examined the bed, the quilts, the small touches Evelyn had added to make the space feel like a home. "And you're both residing here now, full-time?" "Yes," Cole said. "We moved in 4 days ago when the construction was complete. Before that, we stayed in the main house while the ranch hands helped finish the work. I'll need to see evidence of ongoing residence, personal effects, that sort of thing." Evelyn showed him her hairbrush on the washstand, her few dresses hanging on pegs, the book she'd been reading on the bedside table. Cole pointed out his shaving kit, his work clothes, his boots by the door. The inspector cataloged everything with maddening slowness. Finally, he stepped outside and surveyed the property. "The construction is solid. The property shows clear evidence of improvement: the house, the fencing, the water management system, and your records indicate sustained investment and planning for long-term residents. So the claim will be approved." Evelyn couldn't keep the hope from her voice. "I'll be making my recommendation to the territorial office, however." He paused, and Evelyn's stomach dropped. "I should inform you that a challenge has been filed by Mr. Harlan Price. He's claiming that your marriage was undertaken solely for the purpose of qualifying for the homestead claim, and that it therefore constitutes fraud against the government." Cole's face went stony. "That's a lie." "Perhaps, but the challenge must be investigated. Mr. Price has requested a formal hearing to present evidence supporting his claim. That hearing is scheduled for 1 week from today in the territorial courthouse in Phoenix." "Evidence?" Evelyn's voice came out strangled. "What evidence could he possibly have?" "That I can't say, but I will tell you that the territorial office takes fraud very seriously. If Mr. Price can prove that your marriage is not genuine, that it was contracted purely as a legal convenience to obtain land, the claim will be denied and you could face criminal charges." The world tilted. Evelyn reached for the doorframe to steady herself, and Cole's hand was suddenly at her elbow, supporting her. "We'll be at the hearing," Cole said flatly, "and we'll prove that Price is lying. Our marriage is legal and genuine." "I certainly hope so, Mr. Tanner, for both your sakes." Harrison tipped his hat. "I'll see myself out. Expect formal notification of the hearing details within 2 days. They watched him ride away, and the moment he disappeared from sight, Evelyn turned to Cole. He knows. Price knows our marriage started as an arrangement. How could he know? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. Legal is legal. We got married by a judge with witnesses. Nothing about that is fraud. But if he can prove we barely knew each other, that I came here specifically for this purpose, that we're not... She stopped, unwilling to say it. Not what? Not really married? Not living as husband and wife? Cole's voice was rough. We are married, Evelyn. Maybe it started strange, but we made vows. We signed papers. We've built a life together these past weeks. That's as real as any marriage I know. But we don't... She gestured helplessly toward the house, toward the bed where they slept with careful space between them. Understanding crossed his face. You think they'll investigate whether we're intimate? Heat flooded her cheeks. Price implied we're not a real married couple. If he has witnesses, people who might testify that we barely speak to each other, or that our courtship was impossibly brief, or... Then we show them otherwise. Cole's voice was steady. We go to that hearing and we tell the truth that we found each other when we both needed something, that we've built a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals, and that our marriage is as valid as anyone's. More valid than most because we chose each other knowing exactly what we were getting into. You make it sound simple. It is simple. We tell our story. We show them the records you've built, the home we've made, the life we're creating, and we make it clear that Price is trying to destroy us because he wants this land, not because he cares about the sanctity of marriage or government regulations. Evelyn wanted to believe him, but she'd seen how the law worked, how the wealthy could bend it to their will, how truth mattered less than power. Her father had been convicted on flimsy evidence while his accusers walked free. What chance did she and Cole have against a man like Price? What if we lose? She whispered. Cole took her shoulders, made her look at him. Then we lose. We'll deal with it. But I won't go down without a fight, and I won't let Price take this from us without making him work for every inch. Are you with me? She thought about the past 3 weeks, about learning to make bread and keep accounts, about riding Daisy across the prairie and standing beside Cole as he repaired fences, about the way he'd thanked her for standing her ground with Price, the way he'd given her space when she needed it and support when she asked, about falling asleep to the sound of his breathing and waking to find the day's coffee already made. I'm with you, she said. Whatever happens, I'm with you. His hands tightened on her shoulders briefly, then released. Good. Then let's get ready for a fight. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Cole consulted with Frank and the other hands, gathering testimony about the ranch's improvements and operations. Evelyn organized every piece of documentation they possessed: the marriage certificate, the account books, receipts for materials used in building the house, letters from suppliers confirming their business relationships. Martha helped her prepare written statements from townspeople who'd witnessed their courtship, brief though it had been, and their attendance at church as a married couple. But on the 4th day, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Evelyn was in the kitchen making bread when Frank burst through the door, his face pale with shock. Fire, he gasped. The north pasture, it's burning. Cole was off his chair and running before Frank finished speaking. Evelyn followed, her heart in her throat, and even from the house she could see the smoke rising like a black pillar against the blue sky. By the time they reached the pasture, flames were racing through the dry grass, pushed by wind toward the new fence line, the fence Cole had repaired after Price's men cut it. The hands were already fighting the blaze with shovels and water, trying to create fire breaks, but the flames were fast and hungry. Cole grabbed a shovel and joined them, and Evelyn ran back to the house for more water buckets, her mind racing. This was no accident, not with the hearing days away. This was Price's next move, his attempt to destroy the physical evidence of their improvements before they could present it in court. For 2 hours they fought the fire, choking on smoke eyes, streaming muscles, screaming with exhaustion. When it was finally out, 10 acres of pasture lay blackened and the northern fence was destroyed again. Cole stood at the edge of the devastation, his face smudged with soot, and Evelyn saw something in his expression that terrified her to feet. We can rebuild it, she said urgently. We have 3 days. We can repair the fence, show the inspector. He'll say we're lying about when the damage occurred, that we let it deteriorate and only claimed fire damage when we got caught. Cole's voice was hollow. Price has us cornered. No matter what we do, he's got an answer. Got a way to make us look like frauds or incompetents. So we give up, let him win. I don't know. He looked at her and she saw exhaustion and frustration and something like apology in his eyes. Maybe I never should have dragged you into this. Maybe I should have just let the claim go, moved on. Cole Tanner, don't you dare. Evelyn stepped in front of him, made him look at her. We've worked too hard, come too far. I didn't come to Arizona to run away again. I came here to build something real, something that lasts, and I meant what I said. Your fight is my fight. So we rebuild that damn fence and we go to that hearing and we look Price in the eye and tell him he can't have what's ours. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then slowly something shifted in his face, the defeat fading, replaced by something harder and more determined. All right, he said quietly. All right. But Evelyn, if we do this, if we really fight, it's going to get uglier. Price won't stop with fires and cut fences. He'll dig into our past, use everything he can find against us. Are you prepared for that? She thought about Philadelphia, about scandal and shame and secrets she'd hoped to leave behind. Let him dig. I've got nothing left to hide and nothing left to lose. Neither do I, Cole said. And standing there in the smoke and ash, their clothes filthy and their faces streaked with soot, they made a silent pact. They would fight together. They would win together or lose together, but they would not surrender. That night, working by lamplight, once again they rebuilt the northern fence. Every hand on the ranch helped, working through exhaustion and into the early hours of the morning. When the sun rose, the fence stood solid again, and Evelyn and Cole stumbled back to their house and collapsed into bed, still wearing their ash-stained clothes. Evelyn woke a few hours later to find Cole already up, standing at the window and looking out over the ranch. She watched him for a moment, this man she'd married on a desperate gamble, who'd become something more than she'd ever expected. We're going to win, she said softly. I believe that. He turned, and in the morning light, she saw something in his face that made her breath catch, not just determination, but something warmer, something that looked dangerously close to the emotion she'd been trying not to name. Win or lose, he said. I'm glad you're here. Glad you said yes that day. I need you to know that. The words settled between them heavy with meaning. Evelyn crossed to stand beside him, and when he took her hand, she didn't pull away. They stood together looking out at the ranch they were fighting for, the life they were building, and the future that hung in uncertain balance. In 3 days, they would stand before a judge and defend their marriage, their claim, their right to build something lasting in this harsh and beautiful land. But for now, in the quiet morning light, they had each other. And perhaps that would be enough. The journey to Phoenix took 2 days by wagon, and they left at dawn with Martha insisting on packing enough food for a small army. Frank would stay behind to manage the ranch, and he clasped Cole's hand with quiet solidarity before they departed. We'll keep things running. You just go prove that bastard wrong. Evelyn sat beside Cole as the wagon rolled south, the account books and documents carefully wrapped in oilcloth and stored beneath the seat. She dressed in her wedding dress again, the only truly respectable thing she owned, and had spent an hour braiding and pinning her hair into something that might pass for civilized. Her hands were rough now, calloused from work, and no amount of lotion could hide it. But perhaps that was good. Perhaps that proved they were exactly what they claimed to be, working people building a life through honest labor. The landscape changed as they traveled the familiar scrubland, giving way to more varied terrain. They passed other ranches, small settlements, and once, a group of Apache on horseback who watched their passage with unreadable expressions. Cole kept the rifle within easy reach but never touched it, and the riders moved on without incident. They spent the first night camped under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Cole built a small fire while Evelyn unpacked Martha's provisions. Cold chicken biscuits, dried apples, and a jar of preserves that made her throat tight with affection for the older woman. They ate in companionable silence, the firelight casting dancing shadows across Cole's face. Tell me about them, Evelyn said finally. Your family, what happened? Cole was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his tin cup and stared into the fire. I was 15. We had a homestead in Kansas, nothing much, just 160 acres, and dreams bigger than our common sense. My father, my mother, my two younger sisters. His voice was flat emotionless in the way of someone who'd told this story to themselves too many times. There was a drought that year, crops failed. We were barely scraping by, and then Harlan Price's father, he owned most of the county. Back then, he came around offering to buy our land for pennies. My father refused, said it was our future, our legacy. He picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. 2 weeks later, the house caught fire in the middle of the night. I was in the barn, had fallen asleep doing evening chores. By the time I woke up, the whole place was engulfed. I tried to get to them, but the heat... His voice cracked just slightly. I couldn't get to them. Evelyn's hand found his in the darkness, squeezed hard. The sheriff ruled it an accident, said my father must have knocked over a lantern, but I saw the tracks around the property the next morning before they got trampled. 3 horses, none of them ours, and I smelled kerosene in the ashes, even though we only used lamp oil. He looked at her finally, his eyes reflecting firelight and old pain. Nobody would listen to a 15-year-old boy with no proof and no family. Price's father bought the land from the bank 6 months later after I couldn't keep up with the mortgage. I've been running from that fire my whole life trying to build something they couldn't burn down. And now his son is trying to take it from you too. History repeating, except this time I'm not a scared kid with nothing. This time I've got land resources and... He squeezed her hand back. And someone standing with me. You told the sheriff about this, about Price's history with your family. Told anyone who'd listen. But it was 30 years ago in another territory, and there's no proof linking Harlan to his father's business practices. All I have is suspicion and old memories. He released her hand and stood moving to bank the fire, which is why we need to win this hearing on the merits of our case, not on accusations we can't prove. They made their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining the careful distance they'd established, but Evelyn lay awake long after Cole's breathing evened into sleep. She understood now why this land meant so much to him, why losing it would be more than just a financial setback. It would be losing to the same family twice, watching history repeat itself while standing helpless. She couldn't let that happen. Wouldn't let it happen. The second day of travel brought them to Phoenix just as the sun reached its peak, turning the adobe buildings into furnaces. The territorial capital was larger than Silver Creek, with actual streets and a proper courthouse that made Evelyn's stomach clench with nervous anticipation. Cole found a modest boarding house run by a Mexican woman who took their money without asking questions and showed them to a small clean room with a single bed. "I can sleep in the wagon," Cole said immediately, but the landlady shook her head. "No need. You are married, yes. Then you share the bed like married people." She gave them a knowing look and departed, leaving them alone with the question hanging unspoken in the air. "It's fine," Evelyn said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "We've been sharing a bed for a week. This is no different." But it felt different somehow. In their own house, their arrangement had the weight of routine and necessity behind it. Here in this strange room in a strange city, the intimacy felt more deliberate, more like a choice than a circumstance. They spent the afternoon reviewing their documents one final time, rehearsing their testimony until Evelyn could recite dates and amounts in her sleep. Cole's lawyer, a young man named Thomas Reeves, who owed Frank a favor, met them for dinner and walked them through what to expect. "Price's attorney is Cyrus Blackwell," Reeves said over beef stew that Evelyn was too nervous to taste. "He's expensive and he's ruthless. He'll try to rattle you, make you contradict yourselves, paint your marriage as a transparent fraud. The key is to stay calm, stick to the facts, and remember that the burden of proof is on him. He has to prove fraud. You just have to prove your marriage is legal and your improvements are real." "What kind of evidence could he possibly have?" Evelyn asked. Reeves hesitated. "I've heard rumors he's planning to call witnesses who will testify about the rushed nature of your courtship, about Cole's financial difficulties, about the timing of the marriage relative to the claim deadline. He might also try to introduce evidence of your past, Mrs. Tanner, your father's trial, the circumstances of your departure from Philadelphia." The bite of stew Evelyn had finally managed to swallow turned to lead in her stomach. "That's not relevant. Blackwell will argue it shows a pattern of deception and financial desperation. I'm sorry, I know it's not fair, but you need to be prepared." That night, lying beside Cole in the narrow bed, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Every creak of the boarding house made her jump. Every distant voice sounded like accusation. Finally, she felt Cole shift beside her. "You're thinking too loud," he murmured. "I can hear it from here." "Sorry, I didn't mean to keep you awake." "I wasn't sleeping either." He rolled onto his side, facing her in the darkness. "Talk to me. What's got you so worried?" "Everything. The hearing Blackwell bringing up my father, the possibility that we've done all this work, and Price still wins. What happens to us if we lose? We start over somewhere else. Take what we can salvage and find new land." "Just like that. After everything you've built, what else is there?" His voice was quiet but steady. "I've lost everything before. I survived it. Then I'd survive it now. But Evelyn—" He reached out, found her hand in the darkness. "If we lose tomorrow, if Price takes the land and destroys the claim, I want you to know something. This marriage, this partnership, it's the best decision I've made in 30 years. Win or lose, I don't regret asking you, and I hope you don't regret saying yes." Her throat tightened with emotion. "I don't regret it, not for a second. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, a purpose when I felt useless. You treated me like a partner when I expected to be treated like a servant or worse. I don't regret any of it." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "When this is over, however it ends, we should talk about what we want this marriage to be. Really be. What do you want it to be?" "I don't know yet, but I know it's not just business anymore. Not for me." He squeezed her hand. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we fight." Evelyn closed her eyes, but sleep remained elusive. Her mind kept spinning through possibilities, disasters, ways everything could go wrong. When she finally did drift off, it was to dreams of fire and courtrooms and her father's face the last time she'd seen him hollow with defeat and shame. Morning arrived with harsh sunlight and the clatter of horses in the street below. Evelyn dressed with shaking hands, pinning her hair 3 times, before she was satisfied it looked respectable. Cole wore his wedding clothes again, and together they looked like what they were working, people cleaned up for their day in court, trying to look prosperous enough to deserve land, but not so prosperous they'd be suspected of fraud. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. Reeves met them at the entrance, his face grave. "Blackwell's here, and he's brought 6 witnesses more than I expected. This is going to be harder than I thought." "What kind of witnesses?" "I don't know yet, but we'll find out soon enough." The courtroom was all dark wood and high ceilings designed to make ordinary people feel small and powerless. The judge's bench loomed at the front, and rows of benches stretched back for spectators. Evelyn saw curious faces, some sympathetic, some hostile, and then her eyes landed on Harlan Price, sitting in the front row, with the smug satisfaction of a man who'd already won. Beside him sat a woman Evelyn didn't recognize, middle-aged and severe, wearing expensive black silk. And behind them, a man in city clothes who could only be Cyrus Blackwell, shuffling papers with the casual confidence of someone who'd never lost. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Martin Weber." They stood as the judge entered, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that suggested he'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. He settled behind his bench, surveyed the courtroom, and banged his gavel. "This is a hearing to address a challenge filed by Mr. Harlan Price regarding the homestead claim of Mr. Cole Tanner. Mr. Price alleges that Mr. Tanner's recent marriage constitutes fraud for the purpose of qualifying for said claim. Mr. Blackwell, you may present your case." Blackwell rose smoothly, his voice carrying through the courtroom with practiced ease. "Thank you, Your Honor. The facts of this case are simple and damning. Cole Tanner has been attempting to secure a homestead claim for 3 years. Under new territorial regulations, such claims require the claimant to be married and establishing a family homestead. For 3 years, Mr. Tanner remained unmarried. Then, with the claim inspection imminent, he suddenly produces a wife, a woman from Philadelphia with whom he claims to have been corresponding despite no evidence of such correspondence existing. The marriage took place with suspicious haste, and the timing is far too convenient to be coincidental." He paced before the judge's bench, building his rhythm. "We will present testimony showing that this marriage is a sham contracted solely to defraud the government and deprive legitimate claimants such as my client of access to valuable land and water rights. We will show that Mrs. Tanner arrived in Arizona with no prospects, no connections, and no legitimate reason to be here, and that Mr. Tanner offered her employment in exchange for participation in this fraud. Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. Every word was carefully crafted to make them sound like criminals to reduce their marriage to a transaction devoid of genuine intent. Your Honor, Reeves stood, his voice less polished but earnest. The defense will show that Cole and Evelyn Tanner are legally married, that they have made substantial improvements to their homestead claim in full compliance with territorial regulations, and that their marriage, however it began, is genuine and valid under the law. The burden of proof rests with Mr. Blackwell to show fraud. We contend he cannot meet that burden. Judge Weber nodded. Proceed with your witnesses, Mr. Blackwell. The first witness was the woman in black silk. She took the stand with rigid posture and a face that suggested she'd been weaned on vinegar. Please state your name for the record. Mrs. Harriet Cunningham. And your connection to this case. I was on the same train as Mrs. Tanner when she traveled from Philadelphia to Silver Creek. We shared a car for several days. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She barely remembered the journey west, had been too consumed with grief and fear to pay attention to her fellow travelers. But apparently someone had been paying attention to her. And what, if anything, did Mrs. Tanner tell you about her reasons for traveling to Arizona? She said she was fleeing scandal, that her father had been executed for fraud, and she had no prospects remaining in Philadelphia. She seemed desperate, almost frantic. Mrs. Cunningham's voice dripped with disapproval. I asked if she had family in Arizona, and she said no. I asked if she had employment arranged, and she said no. She was traveling blind with no plan and no resources. Did she mention Mr. Tanner? Mention that she was traveling to be married? She did not. In fact, when I suggested she might find a husband in the West, she became quite emotional and said she would never marry, that no respectable man would have her given her father's crimes. The words hit like physical blows. Evelyn wanted to stand up to shout that she'd been grieving and traumatized, that a conversation with a stranger on a train meant nothing. But Reeves had coached her to stay silent unless testifying to show no reaction that could be used against them. Blackwell smiled thinly. So 3 weeks before her marriage to Mr. Tanner, Mrs. Tanner told you she would never marry and had no prospects in Arizona. Does that seem consistent with a long-standing courtship? It does not. Thank you, Mrs. Cunningham. No further questions. Reeves stood for a cross-examination, and Evelyn saw the sweat on his forehead despite the cool courtroom. Mrs. Cunningham, you said Mrs. Tanner seemed desperate and emotional. Isn't it possible she was simply grieving, that she said things in the immediate aftermath of trauma that she didn't truly mean? I suppose it's possible. And did Mrs. Tanner tell you anything untrue? Did she claim to have prospects she didn't have or make false statements about her circumstances? No, she was quite honest about her situation. So she was honest, grieving, and uncertain about her future. That describes a lot of young women in difficult circumstances, doesn't it? I suppose. And the fact that her circumstances changed after she reached Arizona, that she found opportunity in marriage, that doesn't prove fraud, does it? It just proves she found a better situation than she'd expected. Mrs. Cunningham pressed her lips together. I suppose that's one interpretation. It was a small victory, but Evelyn could see the jury of townspeople, not a formal jury, but the spectators whose opinions would influence the judge's decision, whispering and nodding. The seed of doubt had been planted. The next witness was worse. A man named Patterson, who'd been at the judge's office the day of their wedding, took the stand and testified that Cole and Evelyn had arrived separately, that they'd seemed like strangers, that there had been no affection or familiarity between them. It looked, Patterson said with authority, like a business transaction, like two people signing a contract, not two people in love. Reeves tried to counter. Isn't it true that many couples in the West have practical marriages, that affection develops over time rather than being present from the start? Sure, but those couples usually know each other longer than a day. The questioning went on for hours. Witnesses testified about Cole's financial struggles, about the timing of the marriage relative to the claim deadline, about Evelyn's arrival in Silver Creek with no connections and no prospects. Each piece of evidence was circumstantial, but together they painted a damning picture. Finally, Blackwell called his star witness, Harlan Price himself. Price took the stand with the confidence of a man who owned the room. He described Cole as a desperate man facing losing everything, painted Evelyn as an opportunist fleeing scandal, and suggested the marriage was an obvious fraud that insulted the integrity of the homestead system. "I have nothing against Mr. Tanner personally," Price said with false sympathy. "I understand the pressures of trying to maintain a small ranch in difficult times. But the law is clear. Homestead claims are meant for genuine families building genuine homes, not for legal fictions designed to game the system." "And why," Blackwell asked smoothly, "does this matter to you? Why challenge this claim?" "Because I care about the integrity of our territorial laws. Because I believe that people who break the rules shouldn't be rewarded. And because," he paused for effect, "because I have my own legitimate claim to file on that property if Mr. Tanner's fraud is exposed. Unlike him, I can prove genuine intent to establish a family operation. I've been married 20 years, have 3 children, and operate the largest ranch in the territory. I represent exactly the kind of stable family operation the homestead laws were designed to support." It was masterful. He'd positioned himself as the defender of justice, the legitimate claimant being pushed aside by fraud. Evelyn wanted to scream that he'd burned Cole's family alive, that his father had stolen their Kansas land through intimidation and possibly arson, but she had no proof, just old stories and suspicion. When court adjourned for the day, Evelyn felt hollow. They walked back to the boarding house in silence, the weight of the day pressing down like a physical thing. In their room, Cole sank onto the bed and put his head in his hands. "It's bad," he said flatly. "Worse than I expected. Blackwell's making us look like criminals. We haven't testified yet. We haven't shown our evidence. Our evidence is paperwork and good intentions. His evidence is witness testimony making us look desperate and dishonest." He looked up at her, and she saw defeat creeping back into his eyes. "Maybe we should withdraw the claim. Save ourselves the humiliation of a judgment against us." "No." Evelyn's voice came out harder than she intended. "No. We don't give up, not after everything." "Evelyn, listen to me." She knelt before him, took his face in her hands. "They're trying to make us look like liars because they don't understand what we've built. They think marriage has to look a certain way, start a certain way, but we know better. We know that ours started as necessity and became something real, that we chose each other and we've chosen each other every day since. That's not fraud. That's just a different kind of love story. You think we can convince them of that? I think we tell our truth and trust that it's enough. And if it's not," she took a breath, "if it's not, then at least we go down fighting. At least we don't give Price the satisfaction of watching us quit." Cole searched her face, and slowly something shifted in his expression. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You know that I learned from you." He pulled her up, wrapped his arms around her, and held her tight. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other, preparing for the battle ahead. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn saw determination replacing defeat in Cole's eyes. "All right," he said. "We fight, and tomorrow we tell them exactly what our marriage is." That night, they didn't maintain careful distance in the bed. Cole pulled her close, and she went willingly fitting against him like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. It wasn't romantic or sexual, it was something deeper, the desperate solidarity of 2 people facing impossible odds together. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Cole murmured into her hair, "I want you to know I meant what I said. This marriage stopped being business for me a long time ago. You're not just my partner, you're..." He stopped struggling with words. "You're mine, in every way that matters, and I'm yours." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "Since when?" "Since you stood in that burned pasture and told me we'd rebuild. Since you fixed my disaster of account books without complaining. Since you rode Daisy across rough country to bring me tools when the fence was cut. Since you made that house a home with nothing but wildflowers and determination." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere along the way this stopped being an arrangement and started being real." She tilted her head back to look at him in the darkness. "For me too. I kept telling myself it was just partnership, just necessity. But then you'd smile at something I said or explain the ranch's water system like it was the most important thing in the world, or fall asleep mid-sentence because you'd worked yourself to exhaustion, and I'd think..." Her voice caught. "I'd think that I wanted this to be real, wanted us to be real. "We are real," he said firmly. "Tomorrow we show them exactly how real." He kissed her then properly, and it was nothing like the brief perfunctory kiss they'd exchanged at their wedding. This was deep and claiming and full of all the feelings they'd been carefully not acknowledging for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathless Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever the judge decided, this was real. They were real, and no one could take that from them. Morning came too soon, and they dressed in weighted silence, preparing for battle. At the courthouse, Reeves met them with nervous energy. "Today's our turn. I'm calling you first, Cole, then Evelyn. Just tell the truth. Stay calm, and trust that the facts are on our side." Cole took the stand and was sworn in. Under Reeves's gentle questioning, he explained the ranch's history, the improvements he'd made, his reasons for filing the homestead claim. He was honest about his financial struggles, about the pressure of competing with larger operations like Price's, about needing the additional land to make the ranch viable long-term. "And why did you marry Mrs. Tanner?" Reeves asked. Cole looked directly at the judge. "At first, because I needed a wife to qualify for the claim. I'll be honest about that. The law required marriage, and I didn't have time for traditional courtship. But I didn't trick Evelyn. I told her exactly what I needed and what I could offer, and she made her choice with full knowledge. And now, 3 weeks later, now I'm married to her because I want to be, because she's proven herself a partner in every sense, because she works harder than anyone I know, because she's smart and capable and brave, because somewhere in the middle of building a life together, we built something real." Blackwell's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered at the timeline, at Cole's financial desperation, at the convenient timing of the marriage. But Cole held firm, never contradicting himself, never pretending their marriage had been anything other than what it was, a practical arrangement that had become something more. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Reeves started with gentle questions, her background, her father's trial, her reasons for leaving Philadelphia. "I came west because I had nothing left," she said clearly. "My father was executed for fraud. Our assets were seized. I had no family, no prospects, and no future in Philadelphia. I came to Arizona to disappear, to start over where no one knew my name or my shame." "And you met Mr. Tanner how?" "I went to his ranch looking for work, any work. I would have mucked stalls or washed dishes, I didn't care. I was desperate." She met the judge's eyes. "He offered me marriage instead, told me honestly what he needed and what he could provide. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't a love story. It was two desperate people finding a way to help each other survive. And now," Evelyn took a breath, "now it's become everything I never expected. Cole Tanner is the most honest man I've ever known. He's never lied to me, never made promises he couldn't keep. He's treated me with respect when he could have treated me as servant or property. He's given me purpose and partnership and a home." Her voice strengthened. "Our marriage might have started as necessity, but it's become choice. Every morning I choose to stay. Every morning he chooses to keep me. That's more real than half the so-called proper marriages I saw in Philadelphia." The courtroom was silent. Even Blackwell seemed momentarily at a loss. Then he stood for cross-examination, and the veneer of respectability cracked. "Mrs. Tanner, you admitted your father was a fraud. You admitted you came west fleeing scandal. Isn't it true that you're simply continuing your father's pattern, using legal manipulation to get what you want?" "No." Her voice was steady. "My father lied and cheated and hurt innocent people. I told Cole the truth from the beginning. There's no fraud in honest dealing." "Honest dealing? You married a stranger for land." "I married a stranger for survival. The land is his, not mine. I own nothing. I benefit only insofar as his success means I have a home. Where's the fraud in that?" Blackwell's face reddened. "You expect this court to believe that in 3 weeks you've developed genuine feelings for a man you married purely for convenience." Evelyn looked at Cole sitting in the gallery with his heart in his eyes, and she knew with absolute certainty that whatever the judge decided, she'd made the right choice that day at the ranch gate. "I don't expect you to believe anything," she said quietly. "I'm simply telling you what's true. Our marriage might not look like yours. It might not have started like yours. But it's ours, and it's real, and no one gets to tell us otherwise. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Weber banged his gavel for silence, and Blackwell dismissed her with obvious frustration. Reeves presented their documentation, the perfect account books, the receipts for materials, the testimony from ranch hands about the improvements, and the couple's evident partnership. Finally, closing arguments. Blackwell painted them as frauds, capitalizing on a legal loophole. Reeves argued they'd met every requirement of the law and that their marriage, however unusual, was legally valid and increasingly genuine. Judge Weber called a recess to deliberate. Cole and Evelyn sat in the hallway, hands clasped, waiting for their future to be decided by a stranger. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun moved across the sky, and Evelyn felt each minute like a physical weight. Finally, the bailiff called them back. They filed into the courtroom, and Evelyn's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Judge Weber looked grave as he surveyed the room. "This case has required me to consider the intersection of law and human nature," he began. "The homestead regulations are clear: claimants must be married and establishing family homes. The intent is to encourage stable family settlement, not to reward fraud. The question before me is whether the Tanners' marriage constitutes fraud or simply an unconventional beginning to a legitimate union." He paused, and Evelyn couldn't breathe. "I find that while the timing of this marriage is suspicious, and while it clearly was motivated in part by legal requirements, that does not automatically constitute fraud. The Tanners have made substantial improvements to their claim. Their documentation is thorough and accurate, and most importantly, their testimony, however uncomfortable, was honest. They didn't pretend to a romance that didn't exist. They acknowledged the practical nature of their union while also demonstrating that it has evolved beyond mere convenience." Hope flickered in Evelyn's chest. "Mr. Price's challenge is therefore denied. The Tanner homestead claim will proceed to final approval pending the standard inspection confirmation." He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned." For a moment, Evelyn couldn't process the words. Then Cole was pulling her to her feet, and Reeves was shaking their hands, and the courtroom was erupting in conversation. They'd won. Against all odds, against Price's money and influence and carefully constructed case, they'd won. Price's face was purple with rage as he pushed past them toward the exit. "This isn't over, Tanner. I'll find another way." "No," Cole said quietly but firmly. "It is over. You lost. Now leave us alone." Outside the courthouse, in the brutal Arizona sun, Evelyn turned to Cole and started laughing. It was half hysterical, born of relief and exhaustion and sheer disbelief. And after a moment, Cole joined her. They stood on the courthouse steps, laughing like fools, while Phoenix went about its business around them. "We did it," Evelyn gasped. "We actually did it." "You did it," Cole corrected. "That testimony, Evelyn, you were incredible." "We did it together." She took his hands, "like we do everything." He kissed her then, right there on the courthouse steps, with half of Phoenix watching, and she kissed him back with all the fear and hope and love she'd been holding back for weeks. When they broke apart, she saw Martha's gold band catching sunlight on her finger, and suddenly she didn't want to give it back. Didn't want this to be temporary or borrowed. Wanted it to be hers forever. "Come on," Cole said, tucking her against his side. "Let's go home." Home. Not his home or the ranch or the territory. Home. Where they belonged together. They left Phoenix the next morning, and the journey back felt different. Lighter somehow. The documents in their satchel now included Judge Weber's official ruling certifying their claim as legitimate. The land was theirs. The future was theirs. And most importantly, they were theirs. On the second night camped again under impossible stars, Cole pulled her close and said, "When we get back, I want to do something." "What?" "Get married again, properly, with Martha and Frank and everyone we care about watching. Not because we have to, because we want to." Evelyn's throat tightened. "But we're already married." "Legally. But I want to marry you the right way. Want to make vows that aren't about claims or necessity. Want to promise you everything I couldn't promise that first day in the judge's office." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that too." They arrived back at Iron Willow Ranch at sunset, the sky bleeding gold and orange across the horizon. Frank came out to meet them, and when they told him the news, his weathered face split into a grin. Martha emerged from the house, and Evelyn ran to her, hugging her tight and returning the gold band. "We won," she said. "Martha, we won." "Of course you did," Martha said firmly, but her eyes were bright with tears. "I never doubted it." That night, lying in their bed in the house they'd built together, Cole held Evelyn close and said the words he'd been holding back. "I love you. I should have said it sooner, but I was afraid of wanting too much, of scaring you away. But I love you, Evelyn. Not because you're my wife on paper, because you're my wife in truth." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I think I have since you let me cry on you after we fought the fire. Maybe even before." He kissed her hair, her forehead, her lips. And for the first time since their wedding night, the careful distance between them dissolved entirely. What followed was tender and unhurried, the natural culmination of weeks of growing closer, of choosing each other, of building something real from nothing. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Evelyn thought about that desperate girl who'd stood at the ranch gate asking for work, about Cole's impossible offer and her terrified acceptance, about how sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. "By sundown," she murmured sleepily. "What?" "You said I had until sundown to decide. To marry you or walk away. Best deadline I ever faced." Cole's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made was asking you." Outside the ranch settled into night horses, shifting coyotes calling the wind, whispering through the cottonwood. And inside their hard-won home, two people who'd married as strangers fell asleep as lovers, their future finally truly theirs. The morning after they returned from Phoenix, Evelyn woke to find Cole already up, standing at the window and watching the sun paint the eastern sky with shades of rose and gold. She studied him in the soft light, this man who'd become her husband in truth, as well as name, who'd fought beside her and trusted her, and somehow impossibly learned to love her. The events of the previous night hung between them, tender and transformative, changing everything while changing nothing at all. "You're staring," Cole said without turning a smile in his voice. "I'm appreciating." She rose and moved to stand beside him, and he immediately wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything we need to do. The final inspection will happen in 2 weeks now that the court's cleared us. We need to make sure everything's perfect, no loose ends for Price to exploit if he tries another challenge." "He won't," Evelyn said with more confidence than she felt. "Judge Weber's ruling was clear, and even Price has to respect the law eventually." Cole's expression darkened slightly. "Men like Price don't respect anything but power. He might have lost this round, but he's not done with us. We need to stay vigilant." The words proved prophetic sooner than either of them expected. 3 days later, Frank rode in from checking the southern fence line with news that made Cole's jaw tighten with barely suppressed rage. Someone had poisoned the water in one of the stock tanks, killing 15 head of cattle. The animals had been found that morning bloated and stiff in the sun, and the tank water tested bitter with something Frank couldn't identify, but knew was deadly. "It's got to be Price," Frank said, standing in the kitchen where Martha had gathered them all. "Nobody else has reason to hurt us, especially not now after the court ruling." "We can't prove it was him," Cole said, though his tone suggested he had no doubts. "Same as always. He's careful, uses intermediaries, makes sure nothing leads back to him directly." "What do we do?" Evelyn asked, fighting down the fear that rose in her throat. 15 head represented significant loss money they couldn't afford to spare. And more than that, it represented a threat, a message that Price wasn't finished with them despite the court's decision. "We report it to the sheriff, document everything, and we guard our water sources night and day from now on." Cole looked at Frank. "I want someone riding the property lines every 4 hours. If anyone who doesn't belong here shows up, we confront them and get the law involved immediately." "That'll stretch the crew thin," Frank warned. "We've only got 6 hands and ranch work doesn't stop for guard duty." "Then we hire more. Whatever it takes." Cole's voice was steel. "Price wants to bleed us dry, make it impossible to keep up with ranch operations until we're forced to sell. We're not giving him that satisfaction." Over the next week, they did exactly that. Cole hired 3 new ranch hands, young men eager for work and loyal once they understood they were part of something worth protecting. The property was divided into sections with someone always riding, always watching. Evelyn threw herself into managing the increased household cooking for 9 hungry men instead of 6 stretching supplies, keeping accounts that grew more complex by the day. And through it all, she and Cole grew closer. The careful distance that had characterized their early days was gone completely now. He'd seek her out during the day for stolen kisses in the barn or the brief comfort of her hand in his. At night they fell into bed exhausted, but found energy for each other, building an intimacy that went far beyond the physical. They talked about everything: his childhood before the fire, her mother's death, and her father's slow descent into desperation, their dreams for the ranch's future, the family they might someday have. "I want children," Cole admitted one night, his hand splayed across her stomach in a gesture that made her heart ache with wanting. "Used to think I'd die alone, that building this ranch was all the legacy I'd have. But now I want to fill that house with noise and chaos. Want to teach sons to work the land and daughters to keep the books. Want to build something that outlasts us." "We will," Evelyn promised, though part of her wondered if they'd ever truly be safe enough to bring children into this fight. But she pushed the doubt away and focused on the warmth of his body against hers, the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. 2 weeks after the poisoning, the final inspection arrived. This time it was a different inspector, an older man named Henderson, who seemed genuinely interested in their operation rather than just checking boxes. He spent a full day touring the property, examining the homestead house, reviewing the account books with an accountant's eye that made Evelyn glad she'd been so meticulous. "These are the best maintained records I've seen in 10 years of inspections," Henderson said, closing the ledger with obvious approval. "You've documented every improvement, every expense, every head of cattle. It's exemplary work." "My wife handles the books," Cole said, his pride evident. "She's got a gift for organization." Henderson smiled. "You're fortunate. Many ranchers struggle with the administrative side of homesteading. But Mrs. Tanner, these records will serve as a model for other claimants." He pulled out a stamp and pressed it firmly onto their claim documents. "Approved. The land is yours, Mr. and Mrs. Tanner. Congratulations on building something substantial here." The relief was overwhelming. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, and Cole's hand found hers squeezing hard. They'd done it. Despite Price's interference, despite the poisoned water and cut fences and court challenges, they'd secured their claim. The land was legally, irrevocably theirs. That evening they held an impromptu celebration. Martha cooked an enormous meal, and the ranch hands gathered in the main house for the first time, eating and drinking and celebrating the victory they'd all fought for. Frank proposed a toast that made Evelyn's throat tight with emotion. "To Cole and Evelyn, 2 of the stubbornest, bravest people I've ever known. You fought like hell for this place, and you earned every acre. Here's to the Iron Willow Ranch, and to the family that's going to make it prosper." "To Iron Willow," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Later, when the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and Martha had retired to her room, Cole and Evelyn walked to their homestead house hand in hand. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Inside, Cole built up the fire while Evelyn lit lamps, and they settled together in the rocking chair Cole had made from salvaged wood, Evelyn in his lap, his arms wrapped around her waist. "We should set a date," Cole said, "for the real wedding, the one that's about us, not about claims or necessity." "When were you thinking?" "Soon. Before winter comes, while the weather's still good for travel. I want people to see us renew our vows. Want the whole territory to know that our marriage is real and lasting." Evelyn twisted to look at him. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. The court ruled in our favor. The land is secure. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for us. For you." He cupped her face gently. "You deserve better than a hurried ceremony in a judge's office with strangers for witnesses. You deserved a real wedding day with a real celebration. Let me give you that." The tenderness in his voice undid her. "All right, yes. Let's do it right this time." They settled on a date 4 weeks away in mid-October, when the brutal summer heat would have broken, but before the winter cold set in. Martha took charge of the planning with enthusiastic efficiency, and soon the whole ranch was buzzing with preparations. Invitations were sent to everyone in Silver Creek and the surrounding ranches. Martha ordered fabric from town to make Evelyn a proper wedding dress. The hands built tables and benches for the outdoor celebration they planned to hold in the ranch yard. But 2 weeks before the wedding disaster struck from an unexpected quarter, Evelyn was in town with Martha purchasing supplies when she saw a notice posted outside the general store. Her blood ran cold as she read it. Reward. Information leading to the apprehension of Evelyn Carter, wanted for questioning regarding the estate of convicted fraudster Jonathan Carter. Contact Philadelphia Police Department. Her maiden name, her father's name, the past she'd thought she'd left behind reaching across the country to find her. Martha saw her face and immediately took her arm. What is it? Evelyn couldn't speak, just pointed at the notice with a shaking hand. Martha read it and her expression hardened. That son of a Price, this has his fingerprints all over it. How would he even know to look for this? He said at the trial he'd dig into your past. Must have hired investigators, sent letters back east. Found out about your father and saw an opportunity to cause trouble. Martha pulled the notice down and crumpled it. Come on, we're going to the sheriff. Sheriff Morrison listened to their story with a grave expression, turning the crumpled notice over in his weathered hands. He was a fair man, Cole had always said, honest but cautious about overstepping his authority. Mrs. Tanner, I need to ask you straight. Are you wanted for any crime back in Philadelphia? No. Evelyn's voice was steady despite her racing heart. My father was convicted of fraud and executed. I had no involvement in his business dealings. The estate was settled by the courts and I was legally free to leave Pennsylvania. This notice, she gestured at the paper. It's not a warrant. It just says wanted for questioning. That's not the same as being charged with a crime. That's true, Morrison agreed. But if the Philadelphia police have questions, they might send someone to bring you back for questioning. And that could get complicated given that you're now married and living here under a different name. I'm not using a different name. I'm using my married name, which is legal and proper. I know that, but it won't stop Price from trying to make trouble with it. He leaned back in his chair. Here's what I'll do. I'll wire Philadelphia verify what this is about. If it's legitimate police business, we'll handle it proper. If it's Price stirring up old business to harass you, I'll deal with him. And in the meantime, Martha asked, in the meantime, you lay low. Don't give Price any ammunition. And Mrs. Tanner, you might want to write to Philadelphia yourself, to the executor of your father's estate or his lawyer. Get documentation showing you weren't involved in his crimes and weren't wanted by police when you left. Having that in hand will help if this becomes a legal issue. They left the sheriff's office with heavy hearts. The ride back to the ranch felt endless, and when they arrived, Cole took one look at Evelyn's face and immediately pulled her aside. What happened? She told him everything, watching his expression darken with each word. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw working with suppressed fury. That bastard won't stop, he finally said. No matter what, he finds a new way to come at us. Maybe I should go back to Philadelphia, clear this up directly, get written statements that I'm not wanted for anything. No, Cole's voice was sharp. You're not going anywhere alone, especially not back to a place that holds nothing but pain for you. We'll handle this together like we handle everything. Cole, if I'm wanted for questioning, if the police come, they could arrest me. Take me back by force. That would destroy everything we've built, would give Price exactly what he wants. Then we make sure that doesn't happen. He pulled her close and she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and sun-warmed cotton. I won't let anyone take you from me. Not Price, not the law, not anyone. You're mine and I protect what's mine. The fierceness in his voice made her believe him, but worry still gnawed at her gut. That evening, she sat down and wrote careful letters to her father's former attorney and to the executor of his estate, explaining her situation and requesting documentation of her innocence. She also wrote to the one friend from Philadelphia she thought might still speak to her, Catherine Thornbury, who'd been her closest companion before the scandal. The responses took 2 weeks to arrive, arriving 3 days before the planned wedding. The attorney and executor both sent notarized statements confirming that Evelyn had not been charged with any crime, had cooperated fully with the state settlement, and had left Pennsylvania legally with no outstanding warrants or investigations. But Catherine's letter was what broke Evelyn's heart. She read it alone in the bedroom, tears streaming down her face, and when Cole found her, she handed him the letter wordlessly. Catherine wrote that she'd wanted to stay in touch, had grieved the loss of their friendship, but that her family had forbidden contact. More than that, she warned that several of Jonathan Carter's creditors were still angry about the money they'd lost and had been making inquiries about Evelyn's whereabouts. One in particular, a man named Reginald Howell, had hired private investigators and sworn he'd see every Carter in jail or dead. Catherine urged Evelyn to stay away from Philadelphia, to stay hidden to protect herself because the hate and anger hadn't faded with time. "She thinks I'm in danger," Evelyn whispered. "Cole, what if someone from back east comes here? What if they try to hurt me or you because you married me?" Cole finished reading the letter and set it aside carefully. Then he took her face in both hands and made her look at him. "Listen to me. You are not responsible for your father's crimes. You don't owe those people anything. Not answers, not apologies, not your safety. And if anyone comes here trying to hurt you, they'll have to go through me first. Through Frank and the hands and every friend we've made in this territory. You're not alone anymore, Evelyn. You have people who'll stand with you. But the wedding, should we postpone if there's danger?" "No, we're not postponing anything. If anything, we move forward exactly as planned. We show Price and anyone else watching that we're not afraid that we're building our life together no matter what threats they throw at us." His voice softened. "And more than that, I want to marry you properly while I still can. Want to stand up in front of God and everyone and claim you as mine completely and forever. Nothing's stopping that. Not Price, not old debts, not anything." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist they be cautious and practical. But looking into his storm-gray eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, she found herself nodding. He was right. They'd fought too hard and come too far to let fear dictate their choices now. The day before the wedding, Sheriff Morrison rode out to the ranch with news. He'd heard back from Philadelphia, and the police department confirmed there was no warrant for Evelyn's arrest, no active investigation, nothing but old inquiries from creditors that had been deemed civil matters rather than criminal. The notice that had appeared in Silver Creek had been placed by Howell's investigators, not by legal authorities. "It's harassment pure and simple," Morrison said, "and I have a strong suspicion who paid for those investigators to come west and post notices. I had a conversation with Mr. Price this morning, made it clear that if any more mysterious notices appear or if Mrs. Tanner faces any harassment, I'll be investigating him for witness tampering and obstruction." "What did he say?" Cole asked. "Denied everything, of course. But he heard me, and I think he finally understands that this community isn't going to let him bully people anymore." Morrison tipped his hat to Evelyn. "You're safe here, Mrs. Tanner. You have my word on that." After he left, Evelyn felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Not completely, she suspected Howell's investigators might still be around, and Price would always be a threat, but enough that she could breathe easier. Enough that she could focus on tomorrow, on the wedding, on the future she and Cole were building together. That night, following tradition, she and Cole slept apart. Martha insisted Evelyn stay in the main house in her old room while Cole remained in the homestead. It felt strange, after weeks of falling asleep in his arms, and Evelyn lay awake for a long time staring at the ceiling and thinking about how much had changed since that first night in this room. She'd been terrified, then uncertain, agreeing to marry a stranger because she had no other choice. Now she was choosing him freely, joyfully, with full knowledge of what their marriage would be. Morning arrived with perfect autumn weather, clear skies, mild temperature, and a breeze that smelled of dried grass and distant rain. Martha helped Evelyn into the dress she'd made, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't the silk and lace she might have worn to a Philadelphia wedding, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, practical enough for ranch life, yet special enough to mark the occasion. "You look lovely," Martha said, her eyes bright with tears. "Like you belong here, like you've always belonged here." "I feel like I do," Evelyn admitted. "This place, these people, they've become my home in a way Philadelphia never was." The ceremony was held outdoors in the ranch yard under a makeshift arbor the hands had built from cottonwood branches and decorated with wildflowers. Chairs had been arranged in rows, and they were filled with neighbors and townspeople, ranchers and merchants, everyone who'd watched Cole build this place from nothing and had witnessed his unlikely marriage transform into something real. Pastor Williams from Silver Creek stood beneath the arbor, and his music played Martha on a fiddle borrowed from town. Evelyn walked down the aisle on Frank's arm. She'd asked him to give her away, and the old foreman had accepted with gruff emotion that made her love him even more. but she barely noticed the guests or the decorations or even Frank's steadying presence. Her eyes were locked on Cole standing tall and proud at the arbor's entrance, wearing a new suit that Martha had somehow convinced him to buy. He looked different than he had at their first wedding, not just better dressed, but more open, more alive. When their eyes met, he smiled with such unguarded joy that Evelyn felt her own eyes fill with tears. Frank placed her hand in Cole's, and the world narrowed to just the two of them and the pastor's voice. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the renewal of vows between Cole Tanner and Evelyn Tanner, who entered into marriage several months ago under circumstances known to many of you. Today they choose to recommit themselves to one another, not out of necessity or legal requirement, but out of love freely given and joyfully received. Pastor Williams had worked with them to write vows that honored their unique story. Cole went first, his voice strong and clear. Evelyn, when you came to my ranch gate asking for work, I saw someone desperate and scared running from a past that hurt her. What I didn't see, what I couldn't see until I knew you better, was someone brave enough to start over, strong enough to build something from nothing, and generous enough to give her heart to a man who barely knew what to do with it. I promised you security and partnership. Today, I promise you love. I promise to stand beside you in every fight to build our future together, to honor the courage it took for you to say yes that first time and every time since. I am yours completely and forever. Evelyn's hands shook as she held his tears streaming freely down her face. Cole, you offered me a bargain when I had nothing to bargain with. You promised me shelter and work and a chance to disappear. What you gave me instead was purpose, respect, and a love I never expected to find. You saw me at my worst, desperate, ashamed, running, and you never treated me like I was less than I was. You made me your partner before you made me your wife, and that's made all the difference. Today, I choose you not because I need you to survive, but because I want you in every moment of my life. I promise to stand beside you to fight for what we've built, to love you through whatever comes. I am yours by choice and by love forever. Pastor Williams smiled. Then, by the power vested in me and witnessed by this community that has supported you both, I pronounce you husband and wife. Again. And this time, his eyes twinkled. You may kiss your bride like you mean it. Cole didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Evelyn close and kissed her thoroughly to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, the crowd erupted in celebration. The reception lasted into the evening. Tables groaned under food that Martha and the neighboring women had spent days preparing. Music played and people danced on boards laid out for the purpose. Children ran wild through the ranch yard while adults talked and laughed and celebrated. Evelyn danced with Cole, with Frank, with several ranch hands who'd become friends. She accepted congratulations and well wishes from townspeople who'd been skeptical at first but now saw the genuine partnership she and Cole had built. Even Rebecca Mills approached her young face earnest. I'm happy for you, Mrs. Tanner. Truly. You and Mr. Tanner, you make sense together. Thank you, Rebecca. That means a great deal. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Cole pulled Evelyn away from the celebration and toward the homestead house. Behind them, the party continued, but they'd done their duty as hosts, and now they wanted time alone. Inside their home, Cole lit lamps while Evelyn removed the wildflower crown Martha had woven for her hair. She caught his eyes in the mirror and saw such tenderness there that her breath caught. Happy, he asked. Happier than I knew I could be. He came to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders, and they looked at their reflection together. We've come a long way from that first day. We have. Sometimes I can barely remember the girl who stood at your gate. She feels like a stranger. She was brave, Cole said. Scared, but brave. Same as you are now. I'm not scared anymore. Not of the future. Not of what we're building. I trust us. He turned her to face him, and in his eyes she saw her entire future children learning to ride holidays spent with family and friends, years of working side by side, growing old together on this land they'd fought so hard to keep. She saw arguments and reconciliations, hardships and triumphs, all the messy, beautiful reality of a life fully lived and deeply shared. I love you, he said simply. More than land, more than legacy. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I came with so much trouble, especially because of that, the trouble made us partners. The partnership made us friends. The friendship made us fall in love." He smiled. "Best deal I ever made." She laughed, pulled him close, and kissed him with all the love and gratitude and joy she felt. Outside, the celebration continued without them, their friends and neighbors marking this new chapter in their story. But inside their home, Cole and Evelyn Tanner began their real marriage, the way they'd begun their partnership together, honest and committed to building something that would last. The weeks following the wedding settled into a new rhythm. With the homestead claim secured and their marriage publicly celebrated, they could finally focus on the business of ranching without constant crisis. Cole hired 2 more hands to help with the expanded property, and Evelyn took over managing not just the household, but increasingly the business side of the ranch as well. As Trata, she discovered she had a talent for negotiation, driving harder bargains with suppliers, and finding better markets for their cattle than Cole had managed on his own. "You're making us rich," Frank joked one evening after Evelyn announced she'd negotiated a contract that would double their usual price for spring calves. "I'm making us stable," she corrected. "Rich comes later." Winter arrived with surprising gentleness, bringing cold nights but manageable snow and plenty of feed for the livestock. Evelyn spent the quiet months reorganizing the ranch's operations, creating systems and schedules that made everything run more efficiently. She also taught Martha to read, something the older woman had always wanted but never had time for, and the 2 of them spent evenings by the fire working through primers while Cole reviewed the day's work with Frank. It was during one of these peaceful evenings in late January that Evelyn realized she'd missed her monthly courses. The realization came with a jolt of awareness that changed everything. She said nothing that night, wanting to be certain, but when another week passed with no change, she knew. She was pregnant. The knowledge terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. They'd talked about children, dreamed about them, but the reality was suddenly immediate and real. She carried their future inside her, the first of what she hoped would be many children to fill their home with noise and love. She told Cole one evening when they were alone in their bedroom. He'd been undressing for bed and she'd been sitting by the window looking out at stars, and the words just came tumbling out. "I'm going to have a baby. Your baby. Our baby." He froze shirt half unbuttoned, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Then his face transformed with such pure joy that she started crying. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, dropped to his knees before her chair, and pressed his face to her stomach. "When—" His voice was muffled against her dress. "Summer, I think. July or August. A baby." He looked up at her, eyes bright. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy." He laughed, standing and pulling her up into his arms. "Evelyn, I don't have words. You've given me everything. Land, home, love, and now this." He placed a hand gently over her belly. "Everything I never let myself hope for." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through winter and into spring. Evelyn continued managing the ranch operations, though Cole and Martha both fussed over her, constantly trying to make her rest more than she wanted. Her body changed gradually, and with it came a deepening sense of connection to the land they were building their family on. This child would be born here, would grow up knowing the sound of horses and the smell of hay, would learn to read in the same account books Evelyn maintained, and learn to ride on the same gentle mare that had carried her on her first terrifying journey to the North pasture. In May, nearly a year after that first desperate day at the ranch gate, Evelyn was working in the garden when she saw riders approaching. Her heart clenched with familiar fear. Visitors often meant trouble, but Frank rode out to meet them and returned with surprising news. "It's Sheriff Morrison, and he's brought someone you'll want to meet." The someone was a woman near Evelyn's age, well-dressed, and accompanied by a man who was clearly her husband. As they dismounted, Evelyn realized with shock that she knew this woman. Catherine Thornberry. Now, Catherine Bradford, based on her introduction of the man beside her, smiled tentatively. "Hello, Evelyn. I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Your letter said you'd found a new life in Arizona, and I had to see for myself that you were well." Evelyn's hands went to her rounded belly in an unconscious protective gesture, and Catherine's eyes followed the movement. Understanding and joy crossed her face. You're having a baby. Oh, Evelyn, that's wonderful. They talked for hours. Catherine explained that after Evelyn's letter, she'd defied her family to stay in correspondence, and when she'd married James Bradford, a lawyer with progressive views and no connections to the scandal, she'd finally had the freedom to travel. She'd come west specifically to see Evelyn to assure herself that her friend had indeed found happiness after so much pain. The rumors back in Philadelphia are vicious, Catherine admitted over tea in the main house. There are people who still believe you were complicit in your father's fraud, but there are also people like James and me who know the truth, who know you were a victim of his crimes, not an accomplice. It doesn't matter what they think anymore, Evelyn said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. This is my home now. These are my people. Whatever happened in Philadelphia, it made me who I am, but it doesn't define me. Catherine stayed for 3 days, and by the time she left, she and James had become friends with both Evelyn and Cole. They promised to write regularly, to visit again, and to spread the truth back in Philadelphia that Evelyn Carter Tanner was living honestly and well in the Arizona Territory. After they departed, Cole found Evelyn in the garden, hands resting on her swollen belly while she watched the sunset. "You all right?" he asked, settling beside her. "Better than all right. For the first time since my father died, I feel like my past and my present have connected. Like I'm not two different people, the Philadelphia girl and the ranch wife, but one whole person who's lived through hard things and come out stronger. You are stronger. Strongest person I know." He placed his hand over hers on her belly, and they felt the baby kick in response. "And you're about to get even stronger, bringing a new life into this world." "Are you scared?" she asked. "About becoming a father?" "Terrified, but," he admitted, "what if I'm not good at it? What if I fail them the way my father failed me and my sisters?" "Your father didn't fail you. He was murdered by evil men. There's a difference." She turned to face him fully. "And you won't fail our children. You'll teach them to work hard and stand up for themselves. You'll teach them that family is worth fighting for. You'll give them everything you never had: safety, stability, and a future that can't be burned down by greedy men." "We'll give them that, he corrected. "Together." The baby, a boy they named Matthew after Cole's father, arrived in late July during a thunderstorm that broke the summer heat. Martha attended the birth along with the doctor from Silver Creek, and when Cole was finally allowed into the room to meet his son, Evelyn saw tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," Cole whispered, holding the tiny bundle with terrified care. "He's absolutely perfect." "He has your eyes," Evelyn said, exhausted, but happier than she'd ever been. Matthew grew quickly, thriving in the dry Arizona air. By his first birthday, he was toddling around the ranch yard under the watchful eyes of ranch hands, who'd adopted him as a sort of collective nephew. And by his second birthday, Evelyn was pregnant again, this time, with twins girls they would name Grace and Margaret after both their mothers. The years passed in a blur of growth and prosperity. The Iron Willow Ranch expanded steadily, absorbing smaller neighboring properties, as families decided ranching wasn't for them. Cole and Evelyn became respected members of the territorial community, known for fair dealing and integrity. The account books Evelyn maintained became famous among other ranchers as models of proper record-keeping, and she began teaching basic bookkeeping to other ranch wives, helping them gain independence and authority in their own operations. Price never fully gave up his animosity, but as the years passed and the Tanner Ranch continued to prosper, his interference became more nuisance than threat. One particularly satisfying day, 5 years after that first desperate encounter at the ranch gate, Price approached Cole at a cattle auction and offered to buy a portion of the Iron Willow's water rights. "I'll pay premium prices," Price said stiffly. "It would be mutually beneficial." Cole looked at the man who'd tried to destroy them, who'd poisoned their cattle and challenged their marriage and made their early years a constant fight. Then he smiled. "No thanks. We're doing just fine managing our own water, but I appreciate the offer." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Price standing alone. That night, telling Evelyn about the encounter, Cole laughed with genuine amusement. He finally realized we're not going anywhere, that we've built something he can't tear down no matter how hard he tries. "We've built something worth keeping," Evelyn agreed, watching their 3 children play in the evening light. Matthew was teaching his younger sisters to identify horses by their gaits with varying degrees of success. "And it's going to outlast all of us." 10 years after Evelyn first stood at the ranch gate asking for work, she and Cole sat on the porch of their homestead house, now expanded to accommodate their growing family, and watched the sunset paint the Arizona sky in familiar shades of gold and orange. 4 children played in the yard now, with a fifth on the way. The ranch had tripled in size, employing 20 hands and supporting not just their own family, but the families of their workers. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Cole asked, his arm around her shoulders. "When I made that crazy proposal." "Every day," Evelyn admitted. "Every single day I'm grateful you were desperate enough to ask, and I was desperate enough to say yes. Best sunset deadline I ever set. Best decision I ever made." She leaned into him, comfortable and content. "You know what I realized recently? I spent so long running from my past, trying to escape my father's shadow and the scandal and the shame. But all of it, every painful moment, it led me here. To you, to this life, to our children. I wouldn't change any of it, because changing it would mean losing this." "I love you," Cole said simply, as he'd said 1,000 times before and would say 1,000 times more. "Thank you for taking a chance on a desperate cowboy with impossible dreams. Thank you for seeing past a desperate girl and finding a partner worth keeping." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun touched the mountains, exactly as it had that first evening, when Evelyn had signed her name beside Cole's and sealed a bargain that would transform both their lives. The same sunset that had once marked their desperate gamble now crowned their enduring legacy, a home built on honesty, a marriage forged in adversity, and a love that had grown from the harsh Arizona soil as surely as the cottonwoods by the stream. Behind them, the house filled with the sounds of children being called in for supper, of Martha directing the evening meal, of Frank's voice reporting on the day's work. Before them, the land stretched toward the horizon, theirs now and their children's after them. The Iron Willow Ranch stood solid and prosperous, a testament to what 2 desperate people could build when they chose each other and refused to quit. And every sunset for the rest of their lives would remind them of that impossible offer and that terrified acceptance of the moment when desperation became hope and necessity became love. The cowboy had asked for marriage by sundown, and the woman had said yes. Everything else the battles fought and won. The family built, the legacy secured, had flowed from that single brave choice made as the Arizona sun slipped behind the mountains. It was, they both agreed, the best deal either of them had ever made.